Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are here on YouTube and you'd like to actually join the conversation, you need to join Zoom. And you'll see a link there where you can join Makana and you can actually ask questions. If you are here and you see this fine panel and you think that you might be able to add something to it, you might, and we'd love to have you. You just need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that is, that's where we do our mic checks. Once we've done the mic checks, that's as big as our panel is going to get for the day. But we would love to have you join us. We are slowly collecting. We're going towards a millennia of experience in this panel to answer your questions, or at least to discuss your questions. We really can't promise answers, but we can promise discussion. So now this show, if you're new to this, is unlike any show that I know of, where the entire show is just Q&A. So we're really dependent on you. We need you to ask questions. We need you to be part of the discussion. So if you're an attendee, don't be a freeloader here. You need to ask questions. You need to jump in there and think about those things and think about the things between the shows. The best thing to do is write them down. Write those questions down between the shows. Bring them up during the shows. Allow us all to learn together. Every question that you have is kind of helping our collective understanding of the process of media production and virtual production improve. So it's really, really valuable to have your questions. And of course, we'd love to have you as part of the panel when you're ready for that. 6 to 6:30 a.m. We open the doors at 6, and 6 to 6:30 a.m. is when we is a good time for you to come and see how it works. If you want to see what your setup is, whether it's working, whether you think you'd fit in, 6 to 6:30 is a great time to come and test that and make it work. So if you'd like to actually share this with other people, you're more than welcome to. We'd love to have you spread it out to the people that are more like you. And the link to use is in Mukana right now. So anyway, feel free to put that places where you think you'd collect more people like us. That's what we're looking for. So in the collective us. So anyway, it's we'd love to have more of you asking questions, more of you being in the panel. So but speaking of questions, let's go ahead and jump in.
Okay, our first question this morning is a little bit of a salad of initials, so I'll try to get through this correctly. Johnny Estias says, question relating to Zoom vMix on AWS. Was able to install ZoomOSC and vMix on the same VPC. I controlled ZoomOSC with my Stream Deck via a client VPN endpoint. Thanks, Andy. I did have an issue in NDI. I only worked with the NDI Access Manager. Is there any other way?
Studio Monitor would be my first call on that. The NDI Studio Monitor gives you a lot of feature sets and ability to manipulate the video, audio, dB levels, sources, and such right there in one simple package that comes with all the NDI tools. So take a look at that.
All right, go ahead, Beju.
Yeah, I believe Jeff has mentioned this earlier as well, that you need to use the endpoint manager, or you need to set up a discovery server. Otherwise, it doesn't really work very well. Discovery doesn't work directly on VPCs that well on AWS. So yes, Access Manager is the easy way to do it if you just have a couple of instances. If you have more, it makes sense to set up a discovery server.
There you go. That's probably the answer. All right, next question.
Moving on to Hasmukh from the panel often from Cape Town, South Africa. The question is regarding logos in office hours. A comment first, solved the laser light on wall question I had yesterday, hung it onto the wall. Now the question, I'm keen to use a logo like Jayson does in my virtual meetings, including office hours. I don't want to set up an ATEM and key and so forth. What is the lazy option for inserting a lower third or logo on an office hours feed?
Go ahead, Jayson first, and then Stuart.
That's funny because I actually didn't put the logo up today. The laziest way is a practical way. I would say, physically print something that is somewhat semi-opaque or transparent, and just have it right down there and line your shot up nicely.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I hate you, Jayson. That was my answer.
So putting a logo in camera is probably the easiest way to do it. There are a variety of other basic tools that you can use. I know that a couple of people, what's the one that Victor was using before he moved kind of to, there was the, I can't think of it right now. It's kind of a inexpensive Mac-based Beju. I know that Hasmukh is on a Mac, Beju.
Ecamm. He was using Ecamm.
So Ecamm will insert that logo. for what I do when I'm not using hardware is Vimeo Live. So that's what I use is Vimeo Live. So I can do all kinds of things, playback and lower thirds. And what are you using there, Felipe?
Vimeo Live.
Vimeo Live. Yeah. So I use Vimeo Live for all of those little basic. I'm going to insert stuff into it when I'm not using hardware. So that's kind of my approach. Go ahead, Leo, and then Bill.
So I will use Ecamm for if I'm doing it in there. But the way I like to do it is the way I'm doing it here. And that is a standard pop-up that you'd normally use at an event.
Right.
You take the top pole out, so because they normally have 3 poles. You take the top pole out, so it's there, and you just line it up, and it just works.
Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
When I was out in the voice booth, and that's where I started in office hours, I always have an iPad out there because that's how I read scripts without having to turn pages. And I, for a little while, put my logo on the iPad and just put it on a shelf behind me. So it was real simple if you want to do something basic like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
For those of us who are IP based, the little boxes that take your HDMI signal or your SDI signal and convert it to IP, you can often load in a logo file or a graphic in those and have that displayed, but that's over everything.
The funny thing is that the first time I bought a lot of ATEM switchers was specifically to do that one thing where we needed to add a logo to a whole bunch of videos. And in 2012, the cheapest way to do that was to buy 12. We had 12 video feeds that I had to have logos over. And the cheapest way to do that was actually with the ATEM. The little ATEM, those one strip production ones that were the original like $1,000 switchers. Yeah, the studios. We bought 12 of those, and that's where our first big tranche into lots of switchers. We had 4 or 5 before that, but then we bought those, and then they got used everywhere. But it was specifically to do that one thing, which is that's all it did was add that logo. Go ahead, Jayson.
It makes me wonder, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it wouldn't work, but it occurred to me that if you were really creative, you could do it with a LUT and a well strategically placed color right at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. But I think that on a Mac again, I think that Ecamm or Vimeo Live or put it in camera are probably the easiest non-ATEM solutions. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was going to say, I use Vimeo Live a lot, but I also would point out that using setting up the ATEM Mini to do it is a set and forget kind of exercise, because I have lots of different logos plugged in to my system.
Right.
And it's set and forget.
I think the big question is also whether you're using webcams or whether you're using real cameras, for your input. So if you've got a webcam, then you need a software-based or in-camera version to make all of that work. Next question.
Moving on, Ed Willick of Valley Cottage, New York says, "Good morning. I'm looking for recommendations for a good clock and countdown timer, either an app or a browser-based. I need something I can capture and feedback to presenters in Zoom as a virtual input."
Go ahead, Bill.
The one that I've used mostly, and I've found mostly when I've done like announcing jobs and conferences and things like that, is a little app for iOS called Mini Timer. It does a really nice countdown clock. It's really easy to feed that out via the little Apple Lightning to HDMI. You can give people a video signal so they can distribute it around the place. And it's simple, and it's always worked foolproof.
And Guy, you have a friend that builds one that's on a web page, right? It's what's that one called?
Yeah, just put it in the chat because it's free and it's simple. There's a studio view and then there's a public facing view. I like the studio view because it's like a nice traditional red countdown timer to let you know whatever time you set it for that you're elapsing to. streamtimer.com is the URL.
I just lost my gallery. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, there's a free NDI clock as well that you can key out and bring in as a source. I use that sometimes in vMix or in my TriCaster.
So my answer is that I build them. I handcraft my countdown clocks. And the reason that I do that is because I see that as a branding opportunity. So you can have something that's really quick and easy. If you're just trying to show it to the presenters, you probably don't need what I'm talking about. So if it's presenter view and you're just trying to give them a countdown of when we're going to start, it's fine. Countdown clocks in Zoom are super useful because it gives you a non-comms way to cue your host. So we have a countdown clock and you rehearse it with them going, hey, when it gets to 0, we're coming to you. So it's a great way to just not have to talk to them over Zoom and give them and line up your start time with that. So what I do to build those is Motion. Motion, you can basically use the time code solution, and I think there's a video somewhere of me doing it for you guys, but I can I'll build a video of it. I'll put that in my list. But basically you basically set time code, and instead of having it be the time code, you set it manually. So you can go into the inspector, set it manually, and set it to the time you want to count down to 0, just two keyframes. And it'll just count down. They'll have a bunch of extra zeros on it because it's time coded, and you just crop that out. Now you can sit there, and I build them in Photoshop. I build them. If I was on my other computer, I'd show you examples. But what I do is we'll take the client graphics and we'll make the text the right font, and we'll do all the bits and pieces so that it really looks like a real image. And there is a previous thing where I think I even talked about time countdown clocks or starts or whatever. And there's a whole bunch of me showing examples of those countdown clocks that I've built. I really think it adds, if you're going to use a countdown clock, I admit that I hate ones that look like they're run of the mill. So I wouldn't do a run of the mill countdown clock to a public facing event ever. I build them so that they look great. Because everything, that little extra bit that I do now. The one thing that I like to do that really takes it over the edge is that I recently started doing 3D countdown clocks. So the text is all 3D, and that in Motion, that's one button. You literally say, I would like to make this 3D, and you can make it all in geometry and everything else. And so, I highly recommend thinking about that if you're going to use a countdown clock. If you're just doing it to the presenters, I don't think it matters. They just need to know what time it is. But if you're going to actually do it public facing, really think about, and you don't need to do that. There's some of these clocks that will let you throw a background in and then throw the text in and everything else. You can do that, but I wouldn't just make a countdown clock or have something that's run of the mill. If you're going to do it, make it look great. I'll go ahead, Peter, and then Courtney, and then Leland.
I was going to say, I'm assuming this is true for vMix as well, but you mentioned Memo Live on the last question, and I use all the countdown clocks and stuff in that just as well to do what it's all built in, so why not? Yeah, and I'm not trying to do anything fancy. Let's just be very clear.
But Memo Live works well because you can actually set the countdown, and then you can design a gap for your, you design still design a nice frame with an open gap, and then you can move it into that place. And so I have played with Memo Live. There's a market opportunity for a real countdown clock system, but I haven't had time to build it. I keep on looking at it like I could build an app that would do this really well. And I've got a bunch of ideas, but I don't have time. No, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to say an idea for your app is since you're building videos in Motion with the countdown clock in it too, have the app automatically look at your system clock, and you just tell it, okay, I want it to go live at this time, and it'll automatically back time and start playing the video at precisely the right time to back time it so it ends at exactly.
Right. Having a slider that lets you back time it would be really useful because, so for instance, we start our countdown clocks typically 21 seconds before the top of the hour if we're going to YouTube, because that's the nominal offset for. Now we'll play with it. So you'll see us run a countdown clock, and we'll try to hit it in pre-show testing a couple hours before, because YouTube's buffer changes every day, or almost every day, not every day, every week, but almost every day. And so what we do is we run a test to see what the offset is, and then we start the countdown clock. It's another good reason for a countdown clock is you set the entire team 21 seconds ahead, so they're not looking at their watches anymore. They're just looking at the countdown clock. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the first word that comes out of the host's mouth is at between 1 and 2 seconds after the top of the atomic time. Top of the hour atomic time is kind of what we're shooting for. Go ahead, Leland.
I totally agree with Alex's concept of build your own and make it original to the production that you're doing. But if you need quick and dirty, everybody should know of timeanddate.com. I'll leave a link in the Mercana. You can propose just about any environment for a shower, an event, a Halloween, a text-only type thing. You just set the incremental information that you need to it'll put a browser display on a single page that can be used as a desktop share, or what have you, to at least represent a graphical countdown timer that does like fire off at the end, and then you could have your production go after that. So the link's in the chat.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I have to say I used that a bunch when we were doing meetings to count down to the right day, particularly if it was something online and there might be a, you're tomorrow in Belgium and we're here today, just so people could check back and know when it's going to come. And the mini timer thing that I mentioned, this is what it looks like. It's like super simple and it's super cheap. And if you hold it long, it just starts its countdown, and it has a couple of things, and it's just, it's really rudimentary, but it always works.
I have to admit that what I really liked about, we used to use Playback Pro a lot for countdown clocks. And what was nice is that it had a really good interface for speeding up and slowing down. So we could sit there and just slowly slow it down if someone's behind, or speed it up if we want to move move the team along. And you would actually get the countdown clock is really it's a commitment to the audience. And so we've gotten to like, we have 10 seconds left, and then we'd scroll it back to like 5 minutes because the speaker's usually late or something like that. So we'd scroll it back to 5 minutes, and then the comments would just explode, and some people would be upset, but a lot of people just think it was hilarious that we were able to, suddenly the count, we were like, we're almost there. No, we're not. And, but keeping that countdown clock is much better than a still. Like, there's a temptation not to have a countdown clock because you don't know if you're going to start on time, but it's really something that holds people. We've talked about this in the past. Much better. Like, a still is a disaster. A still is like knifing your event, like knifing it in the back. Like you are just bleeding viewers. Like when you put up a still before your show, you're destroying your show. Just so you know, like it is a disaster. Because it's you are they're coming. They don't know whether it's live or not, and then they leave, and then they never come back. It is just, so the second, a countdown clock is an improvement over that. The next improvement we've talked about before is to have the improvement is to have videos, they're going to engage people that are going to be part of, set them up for the show and pre-build the show with a countdown clock. And then the best way to do it is still a pre-show. Do something before the show that's actually people talking, interacting with the audience, warming them up. When you go to like David Letterman, or when I went to David Letterman, there's a whole like half an hour of warming the audience up. You can do that with your live stream. You can warm the audience up, get them interested in it, get them ready to go, have them engaged, test all your video, test all your audio. All those things can be done before the show, before the top of the show, and it's super powerful to do that. And then you put a countdown clock before that if you want, or put it over top of it the whole time. Go ahead, Jayson.
Yeah, it's as you were saying, it's super easy with nothing more than an iPhone and a $150 gimbal. Get wide shots, just pan across, and that's really all you need. As long as it's moving, it could even be a still that moves. Just pan in, pan out, also, zoom in, zoom out.
You also, having live video, it really helps you from a technical perspective of just knowing that everything's working. We've had issues where we've had issues in the pre-show that we were able to solve before the top of the hour. And it just really is really useful to have audio and video running. That's why the way to start a show is to start it 30 minutes early. Like that is and just have it be it can be a handful of people talking. I mean, we did a lot of pre-shows where we really did a lot of pre-shows with Salesforce with Peter, and I just can't think of Peter's last name at the moment off the top of my head, but he'd be sitting there talking to a couple, Salesforce users or whatever. And it's just great, he just sit there chit-chatting about it. We would tech a lot of things while he was doing that, and it was just really, really worth it. So just something to think about. Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Tony Mobley normally on the panel of Newman, Georgia, at least on the education days. Best voice sound solution for $100 with an iMac. He doesn't specify whether it's listening or recording, but he often asks about microphones, so it might be in that realm.
I'd be tempted to say under $100. Go ahead, Mickey. I'll see if you say the same thing, or Brian.
Yeah, I'd probably suggest the Rode NT USB Mini, which is I think $90 or $100.
There you go. I was gonna say an SM58, with some kind of cable, but an SM58 or a Rode. I haven't used the Rode, so it would be something that would be fun. What's the model number again?
It's the Rode NT USB Mini.
Yeah, it'd be worth
It's
checking out.
funny that you recommended that, Mickey, because he asked me privately in Discord, and I recommended the exact same thing last night.
Very good. All right, next question.
All right, moving on to Courtney Gooden up here in the panel from Hollywood, California. Question about Zoom. Would it be possible to build a Zoom overlay controlled by the host to have a game of Hollywood squares? 9 people in a grid with a tic-tac-toe overlay to put up X's and O's as 2 selected attendees compete.
I was going to say, if Andy doesn't raise his hand, I'm just going to call on him. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, I love Zoom games a lot. When we did our second hour, we did that asteroid shooter game in the chat, and this is a great idea. I've seen a couple of people build overlay layers, basically these Qt apps with transparent backgrounds that listen to ZoomOSC and will annotate Zoom based on the data that we're giving it. For the tic-tac-toe, we did something kind of similar where we put a glyph on screen, and it was supposed to cue the audience about how we wanted them to arrange the gallery view. And then once they did it, they solved the glyph because ZoomOSC was telling them the order, this companion program, that it solved it, and it broke the breakout room and sent them to the next place, and they had to solve another puzzle. So these kind of games, absolutely, you just need the information about how the programmatic. If you're looking for something that's not like user operated, right? We have somebody sitting there looking for the solve. If you want it automated, we can give you the data with ZoomOSC to be able to build something like that.
There you go. Next question
comes from, again, frequent flyer Rachel Ann Clifton from here in office hours. This question is for Andy Carluccio, for him to discuss Zoom artifact obfuscation techniques his platform has designed or is in development for production for finishing aesthetics. Thank you.
I will try to demo some of this in the post show, just because to keep things moving here. But what we've done is we've, in the absence of raw data SDK for native applications, we've kind of homebrewed our own solution for that. And so what I can do with the Zoom ISO program is I can basically give you isolated outputs of all of the individual incoming video feeds, and we can export them in 2 possible ways. We can send them as NDI if you want it on your net, or we can send it via Siphon if you want to get it out as SDI, right? If you want to have a deck link in the system and every person coming out over SDI, and that's clean stuff. I don't know about, the only thing I'm not sure about is I haven't tried it with the new base SDK. This is part of why I'm taking my time sort of sharing this out. There's brand new things that Zoom are giving us, even as recent as a couple of days ago. So I want to make sure that none of the annotations have come back. But certainly things like the pin button in the top left and all of those dressings aren't there because it's not the Zoom UI at that point. It's something separate that we're rendering out and doing some low-level stuff to handle.
That's great. Next question.
Guy Cochran from the panel and from DVE Store says, Andy, can you share with us some of
Andy's on the hot seat. All right.
Yeah. Andy, can you share with us some of the fun that you are having with Haivision Gateway?
Haivision.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The Haivision Gateway is so much fun, and Guy, you'd have a field day with it. But so we make an app that converts between NDI and SRT back and forth, as well as from control protocols, like your ArtNet to SRT and then back to ArtNet and things like that. So I am interested in these kind of gateways because right now our Streamweaver apps are all.
Can you explain what a Haivision Gateway is?
Yeah, so it is something that runs in AWS, or you can actually, I think you can buy the physical hardware for it, but it is essentially an SRT manager. It's a SRT router. Haivision has SRT Cloud Gateway, and then they have just the regular gateway. And the gateway basically allows you to take an SRT source, send it to as many places as you'd like with whatever pairing mode you'd like, or convert it to other protocols like RTMP or something like that. And so it's really, really powerful. What I was interested in using it for was to receive either one of those SRT video feeds, or actually I was playing with the lighting control protocols, ingesting that, and then bifurcating it to a ton of destinations without having to set up the point-to-point communications. I had a demo with Haivision a while ago. They're really, really good people too. They're always available for comment if you have a question about any of this stuff. But it's just an extremely powerful tool. I haven't played with the conversions yet. I really want to get into that, but I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, it's great. We'll probably talk more about that in the future. Yeah. Next question.
Doug Ferguson's in from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and the panel often. When saving a Dante Controller preset without all the devices connected, does that affect the file?
Brian Maddox.
I have a feeling this question was for me. The answer is yes. There may be a workaround around this, but I was pretty sure that, and I checked actually while we were answering the other questions by turning off the console here and doing. Unfortunately, when you save a preset, the very next window that comes up says, which devices do you want to save in this preset? And it gets that list based on what devices are actually on the Dante network. So if the device is not on the network, it wouldn't come up in that list, and therefore it wouldn't save that in the preset. There may be a workaround that somebody knows. If so, please post it in, in Mukana or whatever so that we'll see it, but I don't know of a workaround.
Hey, one question that we had that we couldn't answer definitively over the weekend, Brian, but now that you're here, I'm just going to throw it in there. There was a question about on an X32, the X32 seems to be limited to 8 channels for auto mix. Is there any way in an X32 to go over 8 channels of auto mix?
Short answer, no. Long answer, with a wave server and various other.
Right. I was like, hey, you could get a 64 channel Dante Dugan auto mix and then just pass everything out and come back. But outside of that, I couldn't think of anything. And I just want to make sure that that's what I said is you couldn't do it without a lot of external stuff. But internally, it's limited to 8 channels. Yeah, you could if you wanted to get really weird, you can do some strange routing things where you subgroup things and then auto mix the subgroups via the you can get, but it's really screwy. So the real answer is no. Got it. Okay, great. Next question
is from Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen, Germany. Andy, could you demo the grid view of ZoomOSC? Yes, Andy, you're on the hot seat today.
So this one I think is so ZoomOSC's grid view is the same as your vanilla client mostly. There's a couple of smaller changes. I think what we did do was we created something that can basically like an embedded scan convert. If you wanted to just use vanilla views from Zoom and get those out without having to run a separate scan converter. I did make a demo at one point of that as sort of the precursor to what would become Zoom ISO, because we think that's a little more powerful than the gallery view. But I can share something later if you have a specific question or something you want to see. We can do that maybe in the post show.
Okay. Yeah, great. Next question. I love that the post show, we were just kind of hanging out. Now we're programming for it. Pretty soon the post show will be as busy as the real show. All right. Next question.
Tony Mobley is up next from Newman, Georgia. I got AirPod Pros for Christmas. I have used all 3 the tips that came with it, but still having issues with them staying in my ears. Any suggestions?
I have to admit that it hasn't been completely seamless for me either. I put the medium ones in. I was like, oh, it doesn't really work. I went to the large ones, definitely didn't work. Went to the small ones, definitely didn't work. The mediums ones kind of worked mostly, but I do find myself readjusting them from time to time. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I had the same problem. My ears get really, slippery. And Amazon, you can search. There's a third-party silicon tip replacement for the AirPods Pro, and they have a little bit more friction in slipperier ears, and I really like those.
Are those a third-party, Ray?
Yeah, it's a third-party thing.
Yep. Yeah, Ray has them. Yeah, that's good. Mickey, and then Brian.
Yeah, same. I would recommend third-party, and I'm a big fan of the products from, I don't know how you pronounce it, Comply or Comply, ear tips, and they work pretty well.
That's great. Brian? Same.
Sorry, same thing. Mickey said what I was going to say.
Yeah, Courtney? Nope.
Sorry, I lost my mouse. Just super glue or mortician's wax,
I was going to suggest surgical adhesive, but I thought I was being too mean.
Double-sided tape. All right. Next question. Loctite.
Moving on. Michael Peters from Oakton, Virginia says, I'm a vMix user. What's the best way besides vMix Call to get 8 to 12 guests from all over the world ingested into vMix for show?
I use Zoom. So I'll just put it out there. It's really just scraping a Zoom call if you need to. I've put filters over top of a grid view in Zoom so that they actually fit the squares. For the Public Health Institute, we cut out little templates for each of the possibilities, whether it was 3 up, 4 up, 5 up, 6 up. And we simply brought that in behind the overlay so that you could brand whatever was in the Zoom room and cover the names for the people that are in each seat. And it worked really well. So it's something to try. If you wanted to use any other WebRTC platform that's out there, you could pull that context in and scrape it. That would be my first preference, I guess.
And a little later today, I'll show you how we do it, or I'll show you the results of that. We're going to talk about the Inscopics program thing. So glad that Brian's here. We're going to talk about the Inscopics event a little bit. I'll show you. There's not a lot of behind the scenes to show because we were kind of in the middle of it, but I can show you. We'll talk a little bit about that. For our case, we do point to points with Zoom for each person, and then that gives us a lot of control of each person coming through. Next question.
And we have another Michael with a question about vMix, this time Michael Kriegsman of Brookline, Massachusetts, who says, is there a way to get 3 to 4 Zoom meeting attendees into vMix to capture each participant's audio as an ISO file?
That's exactly what we'll talk about in the second hour, because that's exactly what we do. So, we've done probably, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 100 of them over the last 6 months and over the last 3 or 4 months. And all of them have been kind of in that approach. I don't know, you can definitely record them all, using Zoom's backend record. It can record all the individual attendees. But if you want to do it live and you want them ISO'd, you can't. You need to have each one of them in their own connection. Sorry?
Separate machines and separate accounts where you could log into each and have them come in on a separate machine in your system. Yes, you could.
That's what we do with Zoom Rooms. Go ahead, Stuart.
I've actually got an alternative solution, and we'll get Leland to double check this. But if each of those attendees was able to send an SRT feed, and you could send those SRT feeds to Zoom's internal like replays recorder, that would give you at least 4 ISOs built into vMix.
The real issue with SRT is that the latency is a little higher. And I will say that if you're having conversations, we notice the difference in the conversations between 200 and 300 milliseconds. And, literally that 100 milliseconds changes the entire nature of the conversation. So, we find that Skype is at about 330 milliseconds a leg. SRT is rarely stable under 500 milliseconds. I mean, that's been our experience. 500 milliseconds is kind of as low latency as we've seen SRT go and still be stable. And SRT usually likes to be at 1 to 2 seconds has been kind of our experience of where it's really at its base. So is Zixi. We keep Zixi at 5 seconds, to make sure that it manages it. So we're trying to do something that is reliable. It's secure, reliable transport. We're trying to make it reliable, but if we take away its buffer, it's hard to keep it reliable. It's not SRT anymore. It's just ST or maybe just T. So as we lower that down, so we want to, we're trying to make SRT something that it isn't. And so I think that we want to kind of keep that in mind as we look at the way we use these transports, is that if you're just recording an interview or something, it's probably fine. But if you're actually trying to, some of that gap actually makes, when you're doing interviews, it's nice because the person's waiting, creates that, they don't talk over you as much because they're waiting for you to finish the conversation. You've got like a little tail there on the conversation. But for roundtables and discussions and so on and so forth, that lower latency makes a huge difference. And every 100 milliseconds is impacting your discussion. Go ahead, Andy.
In the world of theater, what I've usually done is I have all of our participants on a Zoom call, so you get the real-time communication between them. But then I run a program that just quietly is sending me a copy as SRT.
Yeah.
Then we have our stage management on a separate clock that deals with production 5 seconds after it occurred in Zoom.
Yeah, I have been thinking about the possibility of using really low latency protocols for just the audio and just telling people, because we already do that now. When we send them back their returns, they're seeing themselves kind of delayed, and we just tell them to ignore that. And I actually think that there's an argument for, we almost, in a recent kit, almost put a barracks into every box because we were already building the hardware, because I think that is down to like 12 milliseconds or something. I mean, it's definitely below a frame. And the idea was to let them just have that conversation back and forth and just tell them, hey, you're going to be a little out of sync. Don't worry about it. And it's funny that people are used to online now are kind of used to everything being out of sync because everything's out of sync all the time. You were to say something, Andy?
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick that at a technical level, if you take the audio out of the SRT, you actually can pretty dramatically lower its latency as well. I played a lot with FFmpeg, SRT, and all of that, and looking at the guts of it and how it comes together. And when you pull that element out and it's not mixing that into the video feed, you can reduce the latency dramatically. It was a very surprising result.
Interesting. Next question.
Moving to David Brady of New York, who says, when using Zoom rooms to get better recordings, is the room simply in as a participant, or is the room the host of the meeting? Any tips on signal path or workflow are going to be appreciated. Thanks.
I'm going to table that a little bit because I'm going to talk about it a lot in the second hour of why we do what we do and how we do it. And so let's keep that for the second hour. Next question.
Okay, moving on to Paul Wallace of Austin, Texas. And let me move that over. And then, okay. Can someone do a step-by-step walkthrough on how to use restream.io to broadcast to multiple destinations? Any gotchas or tips to be aware of?
Go ahead, Jayson, and then Leland.
It is insanely easy. The first step is you add the accounts that you want to be streaming to. The second step is you put titles on those streams. And the third step is you start encoding. And I guess the fourth one would be select your destination by toggling the switches on. I mean, that really is it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had it up running 15 minutes when I jumped into it the first time. And so it really is you're setting up an account. It'll give you the ingest points for that account for your restream, because you're streaming to restream, RTMP typically. And then you are streaming from restream out to, whatever platforms you need to go to, and you just keep on adding them. And then the only gotcha that I would say is that I have a tendency to turn them off. I want to turn them on manually. I don't like the fact that restream I start streaming and they immediately start streaming to everything. I get that that's a feature for some people. It's not a feature for me. Like it activating, like turning on a YouTube event and streaming to it the moment it gets bits is kind of terrifying to me. Like I like to see it in preview. like, am I getting video and how's it going? And it's going to run for a little while. And I know that I'm old fashioned that way, but I've seen a lot of people have some really uncomfortable opening minutes. And the only thing worse than, I would say the only thing worse than putting up a still before that we talked about earlier than on a live event is putting up bad frames, like bad things that aren't working and people look disorganized and they're all, at the beginning, not a great look, for a packaged event. For a long event like this, I mean, we have kind of a soft start, but I think that's part of the thing here, right? To do, that we're kind of getting ready to go and you're kind of jumping into it. But I would say that, bad videos, if I'm a brand, would not be something I would recommend. Jeffrey and then Leo.
Not really a gotcha, but more Restream's actually a champion of this. If you want to get onto LinkedIn Live as one of your channels, all you have to do is talk to support and they will help you get onto LinkedIn Live, which is kind of difficult to do. In fact, without Restream, I was waiting. It was about a year and a half. I was waiting at that point. Restream came in and I had it within 3 weeks.
I know guys at LinkedIn Live, and it took me 6 weeks. It's like to get maybe more like 3 months, I think, actually, to get in. And I was like, what do I have to do? Like I filled out the forms, and so it was it has been hard to get that up to speed. Next question. Oh, I'm sorry, Leo, you have.
Don't skip Leland. Leland.
Leland. I'm sorry, Leland. Go ahead.
No, very quickly, one of the things that I find is a gotcha with it is when you go to Periscope at the moment, which will be changing to Twitter. I hear that Twitter just going to take the API straight over. I heard that this morning to Twitter. So we won't have to do any changes. But if you are going to be going to multiple Periscopes or Twitters, what you have to do is use incognito windows to set it all up, because every time you set it up, it's in your browser and it breaks and it just becomes a right faff.
Do you have Twitter Producer?
No, I don't, because Twitter Producer, there were some requirements to get Twitter Producer that you needed to have a brand, but they've always allowed Periscope without it. Right. But apparently that live feature is coming across.
All I can say is Twitter Producer is really nice compared to Periscope. So the I didn't know that I had something that I was working. I worked on a bunch of stuff, and I think somehow my account got added, and so I didn't realize that it was hard. I didn't realize until recently that it was hard to get Twitter Producer, but it's reasonably good. I mean, the unfortunate thing with Twitter is that the encoding quality is really low. So I mean, that's the biggest gotcha with Twitter is that it's not.
So Leland, what do you say?
Leland.
Well, I didn't have anything to say, Paul. I was just going to kind of throw in 2 cents here and there, so that's not a big deal.
Next question.
Moving on, Aunt Pruitt of San Francisco says, in random discussions with, let's say, audio non-professionals, I've noticed people can't hear things that I hear when listening to music. I know frequency profiles make a difference, but even still, some people can't hear the same. Is it safe to think that audio monitoring is a bit like wine tasting? Some people can discern differences and some can't.
No. Yeah, go ahead, Jayson.
I mean, if you're looking for a yes/no answer, the answer is absolutely yes. There is a huge difference in human hearing, but really learning to listen critically and to listen to the entire frequency range critically is a skill that can be taught to some degree. Would the audio guys agree with me on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey, and then Brian, and then John.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's more of experience, like, critical listening, and like, say, for a lot of us here, we're doing it literally every day. And if you're doing that, you're really listening to sound, then a person would eventually be able to just pick it up when they hear something wrong, like immediately, as opposed to like a lay person.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think this is and actually I like the analogy of a wine taster, because I do think that there's a certain amount of inherent talent, just as there's an inherent talent in most things that we do. Like, if you're born with athletic ability, then you have a certain natural talent, but you also have to work at it for 15 years of your life in order to get to the NBA. Like, you don't just show up and go, I'm talented. So there's absolutely a huge component of it that can be taught and can be learned. And someone that isn't very talented can become competent at listening to audio and hearing things that the normal person couldn't hear, because the normal person hasn't put in the work.
Yeah, John.
When you've been to a dozen AC/DC concerts like I have, and you can't hear above 15K anymore, the funnest trick you could ever do is download this app called Dog Whistle and go into McDonald's and turn it on to about 15K and watch all of the kids cover their ears and none of the parents can hear it. It's the funnest thing ever.
Funnest thing ever. Well, that says something. Anyway, Peter, and then Courtney.
Well, on a slightly different vein, in a prior life a long time ago, I got introduced to a Master Chief sonar operator who, if you want to talk to somebody who has really good ears, this is on a submarine, and count propeller turns, on a vessel that's 10 miles away, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And identify the type of vessel it is, by the way.
Right. Courtney?
Well, I found something psychoacoustically, being a sound mixer for many years and mixing with mono headphones, if you take away the stereo imaging, your brain doesn't analyze sounds the same way, and you hear, because the same noises are coming in both ears at the same time, your brain has a tendency to filter out insignificant stuff so that you just don't hear it. But when it's coming in both ears at the same time, those little insignificant things like that chime come in and draw attention to themselves, and your brain can't filter it out based on spatially where it is. So if you mix into mono headphones and wear mono headphones, I think you can listen much more critically to background sounds and little things that you wouldn't hear if you're listening in stereo.
Stuart?
Yeah, just following on from what John Preto was just mentioning with an app, there are security camera devices that actually have speakers built in that are deliberately designed for crowd dispersal of young people that emit something around about 18,500 kilohertz.
All the adults,
range.
all the adults don't just sit around, and the students all leave. That's funny. Mickey, go ahead.
Guy Lombardo at 200 decibels.
Yeah, just building on what Courtney was saying about psychoacoustics. I think for a lot of things, like especially like anomalies with sound, uh, for the layperson, it's they don't instantly pick up that something's wrong, but subconsciously they feel it. They feel like, you know, something's sort of lower quality, something is distracting, something is annoying. But with training, with a sound person, like training their ears to these sounds, instead of this being a subconscious thing for them, or it would be a technical issue that they would automatically be able to diagnose.
Yeah. I think that there's a huge amount of it that is just a matter of being conscious and hold on one second here. I'm just gonna hold on. Sorry, my what I thought was charging is not charging. Hold on. Oh, there we go.
Uh-oh.
This is slightly out. It's USB-C. Anyway, it's horrible. Anyway, so it doesn't click well. So when I first got to Zimbabwe, there's people building sculptures. They're selling those sculptures that Hosmuc was showing all down the road, you know, on little blankets. They just roll out their blankets and they have all these little stone sculptures. And I thought everything was amazing. And I had a friend that just said, don't buy anything the first week. I was there for a couple of weeks. He said, don't buy anything the first week, but go look at everything. And I still couldn't help. I felt bad, like wandering around taking someone's time. So I'd buy something, but it'd be like $1 here, $1 there, and just keep on buying these little sculptures. After 2 weeks, I could tell you that, oh, that sculpture is that's really soft stone. That is, you know, that doesn't have very much detail. That doesn't have much, you know, and I was able to suddenly break down all of these things that I could see. Now, I had also been working with the sculptors. And so I was sitting there talking to Dominic Ben-Hura and what he approaches and looking at his stuff. And my eye focused, you know, like it looked like it, you know, and so I think Brian's right that there is inherent talent that some people have to be able to hear things, but so much of it is building that language in your brain so that you have the distinctions. Until you have the distinctions of what that means, you don't have any hook to hook it to in your brain. So it just goes through your brain because it doesn't know there's nowhere to put it. And so it just says that sound, right? And when we tell you that is a, you know, this or that, like what I was amazed at is that I used to live right next to a cable car run that stopped right at where my house was in Nob Hill, and it went down to the city. I couldn't hear it anymore. Like in the first month, it was a nightmare. I couldn't sleep because it was constantly going past our house. After a month, I couldn't hear it anymore, but I could tell you how many minutes away it was at almost any time of the day. Oh, I think that the cable car is about 2 minutes away. You know, like, I don't know why. Like my brain had built this little pattern in the background that every 10 minutes it's going to happen. And when you hear it go by, it would set a little ticker because my brain now needed to know that. And it figured out how to process it. And so I think a lot of times there's so many things that I didn't know when I started doing visual effects or started doing graphics that became, you know, that I tuned into, you know, that I can hear now because I have the distinctions. I know what those things are. And so I think it's really important. There are some great things that are like golden ear training where they play things for you and they tell you what it is. You know, when I first got to my, one last example, then we'll move on, or I'll go to Ray. When I moved into my new house, it has lots of trees around it. And my wife would sit there and tell me what all the birds were. And to me, it was just bird. You know, like it was like there was a lot of birds out there. I didn't have any distinction of birds. I just had lots of birds. You know, I hear birds. Now I can tell you, you know, now because I sit out on my porch and I have tea in the morning a lot of times, and to kind of get my day off the ground, I can tell you what the birds are. I can tell you when a hawk is in our backyard because of the way the crows are crowing, you know, and I can tell you that, you know, like like there's all these things I can tell you now what the birds, not what they're saying, but I have a pretty good sense of what they're upset about. And mostly birds are just upset. That's one thing I've learned. They're upset or they want to find a mate, but that's pretty much like, that's most of the stuff, but you can start to get a sense of it because I see it. And then I see the chain reaction, and then I connect that sound to that. And when we learn how to do audio, I think we learn the same things. Is that our brain learns to listen for things, you know, that are important, and they're not important until we know what they are. Ray?
Yeah, now this is with respect to music, but there are programs that you can download and so forth that are ear training programs, and they're primarily aimed at teaching you the increments in the well-tempered scale. But there are other kinds of ear training programs, and in all this area, and just by the way, I'm going off on a slight tangent. All people do not see color the same, and I'm not talking about colorblind people. That's an area that I worked for 7 years as a color scientist.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and I think that it's really important to just know that people aren't going to hear. One of the reasons we do mic checks is because you get to hear a lot of different mics, and you get to hear us talk about those mics. And I think that we become more sensitive to it because of that. Next question.
That Jet, it's very important that they realize that there's so much that we don't focus on unless we pay attention. And if you went back to any of these recordings and listened to each person talk and paid attention, you'd hear the different fluctuations and the different sounds and the different ambiances that come in on each mic.
And Leland, I have to say, I would turn off the captioning, because I realize that I miss you raising your hand a lot, because I purposely don't look at it because it drives me crazy.
Okay.
like I purposely don't look at your window because it's driving me crazy. So I look away, and then I realize I'm missing you all the time when you raise your hand. It's because I don't look at you, because anything moving constantly is a distraction for me. Anyway, next question.
Moving on, James Babbitt from here in San Diego says, is there any information about using the Echo 10 with the tracking camera? Will it work like the Facebook portal on Zoom?
Anybody got any? Go ahead. I don't know anything about it. Go ahead, Leland.
I wasn't ready for you to pick on me. Not on that particular device, but I just ordered a very similar tracking device for cell phones that should be coming any day here to I paid $40 for it. It has a built-in little mini cam, and it just rotates around similar to what you're seeing on the demonstration there. It's available on Amazon. Once I get the link to it, I'll share it in the chat. But let me try it out and see if it actually works. I'm getting a couple of Google Pixels today, so I'll see how it holds up.
Great. Guy, did you have any? You were showing it, but did you have any comments about it? Or?
Yeah, they had mentioned in the Zoom blog 2 weeks ago that the software was going to be released, and it hasn't been released, but we found documentation showing that it works, but it's just not actually shipping yet. So if you turn on your Echo and you look for the app, it's not there yet. So it's on the Facebook portal, and that took a while too. It took a while to roll across the world. Like we noticed in the Reddit group that different countries were getting it first. So it's just a slow leak out. And then that Echo 10 device specifically, you can go to the Amazon site and put a pre-order notification. It's not shipping yet.
Great. Next question.
Chris Nichols comes in from Austin, Texas, saying he just wants a definition of NDI and SDI and SRT2. I love these good, solid, basic questions.
Go ahead, Jayson.
Okay, NDI is Network Device Interface. SDI is Serial Digital Interface. And SRT2, I guess I'll kick down the line.
That is a secure, reliable transport, or it's also a captioning format. But given this question, I'm going to assume that that's what you want. Now, what I would say is that in really simple terms, SDI is what we use with BNC cables. It's a very old protocol that works, that we use for a lot of things. BNC cables carry an SDI signal back and forth. There's a lot of ways to translate it, but that does that. NDI works over your network. So you can have just works over Ethernet and can, pass a lot of stuff either inside of a computer to itself, or to computer to computer, or devices to computers. SRT tends to be more for going over and NDI tends to work better over the LAN, where SRT tends to work better over the WAN. So it's designed to move that video file from, across the internet. Go ahead, Stuart, real quick.
SDI is Serial Digital Interface, and is basically something akin to an MJPEG stream at different data rates, whereas everything else that we've just listed is MPEG-4 based.
There you go. Next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago says, my Roll VXLR Plus has a short, and unfortunately they're out of stock. Can you run through alternatives with pros and cons?
Go ahead, Mason. And then Jayson, and we'll move on.
Right. Deity has a comparable adapter. One thing about them, though, is it doesn't have a locking thread, though it is a little bit cheaper than the Rode VXLR Plus. I personally am a fan of the ambient OIML. They're very compact, but they're maybe 4 times the price of the VXLR Plus.
And which one is that? Who makes that again?
Ambient. the timecode guys.
Yep. Go ahead, Jason.
I've got to remind everybody, you will be astonished what you get if you simply ask for it. Call Rode, tell them it has a short, ask for a replacement. Even if it's out of warranty, it really doesn't matter. The worst they're going to say is no.
Next question.
It looks like Chirig Chihita, nice name, from Dallas. If I've got it right, and if not, I apologize. Good morning. How do you get the questions with timecode on YouTube post-event? Is that a feature of Mukana? This is super helpful.
That is a feature of Jeffrey Powers. Where's Jeffrey? There he is. It's a human feature, and it's a very good feature. So all of that. So Jeffrey, you want to explain a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, I can actually show you a little bit. So this is what I have on the screen. It's a nice jumbled mess. So I found a really nice Excel document that creates a stopwatch. I got to watch for Alex to start the YouTube part, and of course that starts the timer. And then every time that a question gets asked, all I have to do is, like, I'll just put in something right there, hit enter, and a time code comes in. I just copy that whole thing over to YouTube. But the cool thing is that last week YouTube has announced that they're going to be doing a couple tests on automatically doing chapter markers. So I'm very excited about how that's going to work.
That's great. Next question.
Moves on to Creighton Fromer of Atlanta, Georgia, who asks, a few months ago, Office Hours talked about how streaming a still image can ruin your provider bandwidth. Our stream gets 20% lost frames in Vimeo when returning to moving video from following stills for 10 to 20 seconds each over a few minutes, and doesn't return to normal. Does this sound like this effect you're talking about?
Yeah, it does sound like that. I mean, going from a still, it's going to change the way it really, for most transcoders, a still is very confusing. Like it just looks at it and goes, there's nothing going on here, and we get error messages from YouTube. We get lots of other things that, they don't like stills. Transcoders don't like stills because they, and so what they'll do is they'll tend to go, oh, you're not using all that bandwidth. And then when you turn it back up, it's surprising that it would never recover, but it oftentimes will recover slowly, and it's mostly for things that are doing transcoding. Like Zoom won't do it because it's just passing things through at a constant bit rate. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I wonder if you could fool it by just running a slideshow or that applies the Ken Burns effect so that there's a slow move.
No, you can absolutely do it. Yep. Anything moving those pixels. The only problem you get into is if you move the pixels too slowly, it fools the temporal compression, so you get tearing. Because it's a temporal compression. Your spatial compression is I'm going to take all in a single image and I'm going to group everything together. Temporal is grouping them between frames. And if it moves too slowly, you'll see this weird kind of like it jumping or it tearing because the pixels aren't changing enough for it to add another P frame. And so it's or B frame. So it's not going to add another place for it, another reference point, because there wasn't enough change. Especially if you have something that's like all white or all gray or something simple and things are moving a little bit, you have a tendency to see tearing. So, I mean, really the best thing to do is have things kind of moving. Some kind of little animation that's looping, that's moving behind it is a great way to put that stuff up. Yep. Next question.
Nick Gutfund of Bedford, New York says, old school question alert. I have 2 dead Sony TDC6 Pro cassette players. Any idea for repair support? Part 2, cassettes transfer services. Trying to get content off cassettes.
I don't know if I have it anymore. For 20 years or 25 years, this Denon dual cassette player roamed around in my kit. I think people saw it in the warehouse and people saw it in different places. I don't know if it made the last move or not. So, yeah, you need a dual cassette recorder is really the best way to do that. Is Denon used to make one. I used to have one for a long time that I never used it. I hadn't used it since 1993, but it somehow made it into every box that I moved. Go ahead, Bill.
So I would start looking on eBay and those kind of places for a decent cassette player. You don't have to buy anything too fancy, but the downfall of cassette players is most of them have a pinch roller system. And in all my experience, the rubber in those pinch rollers does decay over time. So I would look very careful at make sure that it's still got a pinch roller that hasn't turned into goo. But if you can find that, you should be able to get a little either RCA or mini plug audio out of that and just run it into a little audio capture thing in your computer and get them transcribed that way.
Yeah, it looks like the one that I believe the one that I used to own is like $70 on eBay right now. So it's hasn't turned into a collector's item as I thought it might. I never thought that. Anyway, Leland.
If he's just trying to transfer the sound data off of the tapes onto another format like MP3, they actually make these little fobs now that fit the 3.5-inch audio ports that convert it directly to MP3 on the USB fob. So it looks like USB fob. So
I would definitely, if you're trying to duplicate cassettes, then you get a dual cassette player. If you're trying to, but the best thing to do is what Leland's talking about, is just get them off those cassettes, get them onto something digital and move on. Go ahead, Bill.
One last little note, cassettes are bidirectional, which means that tracks 1 and 3 carry a stereo pair. 2 and 4 carry it backwards. So you run the tape to the end, then you flip the tape over, play it. There's a whole additional amount of content often on those cassettes. That's how they work.
Next question.
Moving on to Jerry Simmons in Corona, California. Does anyone know some good sources for purchasing animated graphics that can be used on live streams for video? For example, a slow spinning globe with a transparent background so that I can just drop it into Keynote or Wirecast.
You can get them on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, if you want royalty, or not royalty free, but you want to buy them out, things like iStock and Shutterstock and Pond5 all have those kinds of graphics, and they're $35 or $10 or $50, those kinds of things. Jayson, and then John, and then Jeffrey.
If you're willing to customize it just a little bit more, Motion VFX has some fantastic composite graphics, dye sublimation in water and smoke and fog, and it looks really cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going down the path of I have Motion and I want things to look really great, Motion VFX just has hundreds and hundreds of templates, and you can tear them apart and customize them to your heart's desire. A lot of them are good out of the box, and then other ones are things that you can add to it. But they're really, again, I will say that over and over again that the best purchase that you can make when you're doing motion graphics is Motion. Apple's Motion is $50 one time. They keep on updating it. It's just, and it's super fast and super easy. And once you get over the little hump of getting it going, there's just so much you can do with it so quickly and cheaply. John, and then Jeffrey.
I use the Envato family of sites. Video Hive is the one for video specifically. It's got millions of templates up there.
Yep. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So you said Wirecast. That's actually a feature of Wirecast. They have the ability to bring in stock audio, video, and stills. They partnered with Storyblocks to bring it in. So as long as you have a current subscription to Wirecast, you have the ability. And I know there are some world graphics that you could probably use from there.
We're going to go into speed round just because we're running a little heavy, and I know the guy that's going to talk next, so I figure he'll wait for me. So anyway, but we're going to go speed round and close these questions up. Go ahead, next question.
Christian Ortiz in South Florida says, how can metering software like WLM receive a raw input with no master adjustment? I'm trying to meter in Windows and my levels move in relation to the master volume of the Windows computer. Is this possible?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I'm not very familiar with Windows, but I would assume it would depend on where you are picking up the actual signal on the host that you're running WLM on. Say if you're picking up the signals directly from the interface, then the master volume should not adjust it.
Next question.
Jonas Tatel of Reutlingen says, how important is the quality of BNC cable for running a 1080p 50 SDI through it? What are the common things where they break? And note he has runs between 2 and 100 meters.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Just giggle here for a second. Analog era SDI cable will run HD and 4K on a short enough length. But the digital cliff for something like Belden 1694 is out at 110 to 115 meters. So the better cable you get, the longer you will go with your BNC cable. Common things they break is where forklifts roll over them.
And then you just have you do have slow signal degradation. Almost everything works under 50 meters. And you will for 1080p. Once you get to 12K, things get to be a lot more 12G. Things get to be a lot less forgiving. Really, everything works under 25 feet. So we use a lot of things under 25 when we're building kits because it'll all transport and it's fine as long as it gets reclocked pretty often. I don't run anything over 50 meters ever. Like, like over copper, if it's going to go 50 meters, I put it on glass fiber, to get it there. I just don't have, it's just too much trouble. Go ahead, Jayson, and then Stuart.
No, it's basically
Stuart.
exactly what I was going to say.
Yep, Stuart.
One little caveat with running anything on SDI, the diameter of the cable and the diameter of the dielectric between the shield and the conductor itself is important. If you have anything tightened, such as cable ties, that reduce that diameter of the dielectric and the difference between them, you will get a reflection back along the cable to your signal source. Right. Do not use cable ties when cinching these things up to racks and the like. Use either electrical tape or Velcro-based wraps because they won't compress that dielectric. It needs to be a fixed width down the entire length of the cable.
Next question.
Guy Cochran from the panel in Seattle says, how fast will video streamed from Seattle to Florida arrive from an ATEM Mini ISO to a streaming bridge?
Has anyone tested that? Go ahead, Jayson.
I've got a streaming bridge, and I know that a handful of other people do. So I mean, Guy, let's test it. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought that I had heard Jeffrey earlier when he first got his saying something like 10 seconds. And then yesterday, is that correct, Jeffrey? Was that what you're finding? Like really long?
Well, it ranged from anywhere from 1 second to 10 seconds. It really depends on how many nodes it's passing through to get from point A to point B.
Okay, because Paul and I were testing it last night, and we were getting less than a second from Seattle to Florida. Like he was saying, it was being measured in like milliseconds. I was shocked because I thought that it was RTMP, but it doesn't. Maybe it's not RTMP.
No,
it can't
it's
be
RTMP.
RTMP to begin.
But it's only using half of it. It's using the UDP port rather than the TCP port, so it's not bringing information back. So that helps on that. It once again depends on the pass through, and of course, it also depends on which setting you put on the streaming bridge. If you have hyperdeck high, that's 50 megabits per second, and so that's gonna take a little bit longer than, let's say, HDR low.
Yeah, we had 5 or 6 megabits going, and it was less than a second. We put up a global Greenwich Mean Time clock, and it was going at almost the same tick. So we'll have to do more tests. But yeah, Jayson, I'll ping you on Discord, and we'll run another test. Thanks.
Next question.
Stan Chan of Roseville says, thoughts on Zoom charging for access to the fully customizable API, up to 300 HD streams and 10,000 minutes per month. How much value would it provide if Zoom enables NDI with it?
Is it charging for that, or is that a new? Oh, go ahead, Andy. I'm not familiar with this.
So this is the fully customizable API is a brand new announcement from Zoom. It's a set of SDKs that give you access to the frame data, and it's charged as described here. I was very interested in it until I saw that it was web and mobile only. So I think it's gonna be great for putting hats on people, and it's gonna be great for sunglasses and things like that. When it comes to encoding multiple HD NDI streams, maybe somebody will do that in browser. I would always do that through a native application, and that's why we homebrewed our own.
Why would they make it web and mobile only? Like, why? You think they're just testing it before they do something real with it?
They already have there was a raw data program for the native applications, and you needed to get this magic license key that did or did not exist depending on who you spoke to. And I can tell you right now, it's still in the SDK. I can see the framework like right in front of me, but they're not issuing the keys to activate it. So it's not a technical limitation. This is just how they wanted to roll that out, and it makes very little sense to me.
Copy that. Next question.
Roberta Barrow of Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania says, our church has a Roland V8 HD and PTZ optics cameras. How can I connect them via SDI to the Roland for longer runs?
I don't know if anyone here has the Roland. I think is the Roland
my garage. Mike Rogers has one, I believe. So you might want to see if we can poke him on Discord.
Let's see here. Is the Roland, is it a, I guess the question is it all HDMI or is it already SDI? I'm not clear.
I have this switcher.
Oh, it's HDMI.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So what you need to do is, I mean, it's all HDMI. So the question is, how do you get SDI to it? You're going to have to convert it to SDI and then back to HDMI. You know, so there, and I don't remember. Typically, you can get these kind of converters on Amazon for not very much money. Blackmagic, I think, makes them for like $50 each, but it'd be like $100 for every camera to get that long run. You know, but they're like, you know, you go HDMI to SDI and then back to SDI to HDMI. But that you're going to need a box on each end to make that work. If both are HDMI, I don't know if the PTZ Optics has SDI out. If it has SDI out, then it's solving half your problem. But if they're all HDMI, I think you have to worry about that. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Leo.
You might look into these little boxes that will translate it HDMI into HD base T, so you can run it over Ethernet cable. You can run it over Cat 5 or Cat 6, very long distances, and it converts it back to HDMI. And it also carries besides the HDMI signal, it'll also carry RS-232 and Ethernet network signals as well. So look into that HD base T. It's a transport protocol. It's point to point.
Go ahead, Leo.
The PTZ Optics have FDI out native.
Oh, great.
They're on there. You have to. I think Sky, if he's still here, he has one. There's a little wheel that you set the settings. Trick with that, before you do anything, before you install it, drag the camera right next to the computer, test it, get it working there before you push it all the way across. In fact, Jeffrey has got one there that looks like the PTZ Optics one, and you can see it's got an SDI right.
So that's only half. So you just have to convert it from SDI to HDMI, and
yeah,
there's lots of
loads,
relatively cheap. I mean, you can get them for $30-$40. Again, the Blackmagic ones are pretty solid, and they're like $50. But you can get relatively inexpensive ones, you know, $30-$40.
And I would do that every single time over trying to do anything to do with Ethernet, HDMI over Ethernet.
Yep. Next question.
Next question comes from Sky on the panel from Seattle. Any other iPad other than iPad? What tablet solution would you recommend for an older person that wants to read books, Zoom, do email, play games? He's suggesting a comparison of Samsung, Kindle, Amazon Fire, Nook, Kindle, something under $200.
Go ahead, Jayson.
Everything you just said is basically just a version of Android. The Kindle Fire, the whole range of Kindle are running a highly modified version of Android OS. So what you just said was Android, 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 Android. And that's true. Android is the only alternative to the iPad based on the constraints that you're saying. As far as between the two, I don't know.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The only problem with a Kindle Fire is that it's within the Amazon infrastructure. So that means that some games and apps will not load onto the Fire unless you sideload the Play Store, which means you just got to do a little bit of extra work. But I have several Kindle Fires. The Kindle Fire 10 don't do the ads. You should be good, and a lot of great games on there.
Specifically, I would get the Samsung specifically because of the limitations of what you can buy easily on the Kindle Fire. It's really frustrating. Like I got one thinking, oh, it's less expensive, and then I got it. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? It turned into a something I could probably use as a cutting board. Go ahead, Leland.
I was going to say kind of the same thing. To watch the pricing on the Kindles if you do go that route. Samsung's going to be a much cleaner tablet, and the ad-driven, like Jeff spoke of, is going to also eat into your bandwidth if you're using it online. So.
Next question.
Final one for this section. Michael Vosbein of Woodstock, Georgia is in with. Anyone try the Vive U4 in-ear monitor system? Only about $200, 5 milliseconds latency, just 6 channels. Likely not for production use, but fine for moving freely around my teaching studio.
Has anyone seen it? Go ahead, Brian.
I've seen it and seen of it. I feel like when they marketed this as an in-ear monitor system, that's yeah, it's not an in-ear monitor system. However, I could see applications of using it for an IFB system. It is 2.4 gigahertz. I believe it's mono. I believe I read that. So again, maybe for an IFB system and a small studio, it might be fine. The problem is, you know, and the reason I said the thing about the in-ear monitor system is typically those are used on stages with, like, you know, audiences, and they're in 2.4 gigahertz, and anything in 2.4 that has to work when 500 people show up is a bad idea. But it sounds like Michael has used this and it's working, and so, you know, if it's working, it's working. It's $200. So
I mean, there's many things. It does look like it has some nice little tools as far as in the belt pack. You have some nice volume control and some other bits and pieces. There's a lot of things that, you know, whether it's Ceramonic or Rode Go in that range that are all, you know, kind of will transport audio from one place to the other. I will say that what does look nice about this, and I haven't used it, is the fact that the belt pack has a little bit more control as far as what you can do with it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The only thing that I'll say about the actual unit itself is if you plug that directly into a soundboard, most likely through the auxiliary port, you might have a hard time pulling that out. I've done that before. You might want to use a small extension rather than plug it directly into the board.
Anything that sticks straight out of a board like that puts a lot of stress on the connection, both for it and for the board. So anything you generally want tails, you know, when you plug stuff into stuff, just so that there's it's a stress relief. Your board is really expensive to fix. Like, you know, so like if you see it the way Leland has it presented there, that's someone reaches over and hits it, and now your board doesn't work nearly as well anymore. So I'd be tempted to get like a 6-inch tail that I would use for that, as opposed to just sticking it straight into something. But I can't see if you just put it in the back of the room, it sounds like it might work. It looks like it's actually what I'm most interested in is it looks like it has a couple different channels. You know, I'm kind of interested in it, like to test it. Go ahead, Bill, for small environments.
Yeah, and I've heard it as pigtail, but it's the same thing. It's like a little 6-inch male to female XLR, and every audio person I know has a dozen of those sitting around somewhere in bags, because you want to offload, as Alex says, the strain, make it strain relief.
Yep, absolutely. There you go. You can also remember that transmitter is the most important thing. You know, if you're speaking in the front of the room, think about where the center of mass is for what you're doing, as opposed to where your mixer is. So a lot of times we try to, you know, someone might be 300 feet from the mixer, but they are, you know, the center of the room might be 50 feet from anywhere that they would actually walk. What we would try to do is run a cable to get that transmitter to the center of the room and hang it there, so that you want to minimize the distance between the receiver and the transmitter, and you can use copper to do that. So you don't run any wireless further than you have to. We've done wireless where we put the transmitter right under the seat, because why, you know, don't make it work any harder than it has to. Go ahead, Brian, and then Jason.
yeah, it's just real quick. Line of sight is king. So with wireless, if you line of sight is king, up higher is better, closer is better. That's always true. It doesn't matter what kind of wireless you're using.
If I was working in a classroom, I would go to I would run a cable through, if it was a drop ceiling, I'd run it right to the middle of the room, and I just hang that little thing about 3 inches below, so that it gets a little away from I would try to I'd cut a hole in one of the drop ceiling panels so that it's as far away from the metal as possible, and drop it down another 3 to 6 inches. So it's right in the middle of the room, and I can walk around and probably minimize any kind of dropout issues that you have, Jason.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that should be colossally obvious, but it's worth mentioning. Radio signals are spherical. Do not put stuff in corners. Put stuff, you know, exactly dead center.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so now we're going to shift gears. I don't think we have any more questions here. Let me jump into this. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about. We got permission ahead of time because we kind of turned up the volume on an event, and they said it was okay for us to talk about it. So we do a lot of these events, and this is not necessarily the most complex event that we've done, but it does kind of show some bits and pieces of how we approach it. And I showed it a little bit in passing, and there was enough questions about it that I thought we would go ahead and show it here and have people look at it. I'm going to show you a couple clips. You can If you, I will put in Mokana the link to the page so you can see what it would actually. You can watch as much of it as you want. Let me throw this into Mokana right now. It was a company, or organization called Inscopics, and they put together this thing called Decode. It's a state of mental health, and they had a lot of great speakers that were coming in, and so they brought us in. We've done a growing number of mental health events, and so they keep on getting a little bit bigger and a little bit more robust. And one of the things about Inscopics is they still had things that they wanted to do, but they let us run with it a little bit as far as how we were going to approach it. A lot of clients have a very specific way that they want to do it, and it makes it harder to actually do a good event. So we don't, usually, we do everything we can to stretch that thing out as far as we can. But when they gave us more room, we kept on going, and really tried to build this out. So I'm going to show you a little bit of it. Let me, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of what it took to do it. And then the big thing is this is just an opportunity for people to ask questions. And I somehow have moved my window here. Hold on. Let me just so let me share this screen. And I'm not going to do the audio right now. As far as the sharing, I'm just going to kind of show it to you so I can talk over it. So I'm going to, let's see, we'll grab this guy here. So here you can see, this is the basic video. Now, what we had here are a lot of 2-ups, but we also had presentations. And so you can see these presentations that are done here. So you have individuals giving presentations. You have some single addresses that are there. You will notice, and a lot of them are pretty complex, presentations. So this is a scientific symposium. So you can see that people are kind of providing those. Now, all of this was done, of course, over Zoom. And one of the things you're going to notice is that for the most part, and we can show some audio if people want to, but for the most part, the video is pretty high quality. The audio is also, clean. We also have some playback, and you'll notice that the playback looks pretty good as far as that goes. And then, we do have some nice graphics that are set up. We had lower thirds. So, this is an example of, how far I think that you can, there's a lot of things that other people will talk about as far as scale goes. What we were really looking at is, how far can we take Zoom, as far as that process goes. So a couple things about this, not with Ariane Huffington, but with almost everybody else, you'll notice that they all have, and I believe these were the Pulson headsets they're either Piles or Pulsons, except for a handful of people. This fellow was one person that we had a way that he did it. But most people, we basically sent the same microphones out to everyone. And they, you'll see that, and we worked with each one of them to do that. We also sent lights, and these were, given the budget that we had, we didn't use Brios, we used C920s, for each speaker. But there's a C920. We use in this case, we use the LumaPad, the Nan Light LumaPads for everybody. So everybody got, a light to work with, a headset, an earpiece to put in. These were, in this case, I believe we used I think we had used the the audio implement, or autos, because the audio implements were out of stock. And then, so we had all of them coming in. What we did is we actually, and I'll come back to this if people ask questions about something specific, just kind of scaling through so you can see it. So every person got a kit. I believe there were 40 people that we sent kits out to. It was like 35 or 40 people. So everybody got a kit. That kit had a light. That kit had a headset. It had a C920, an Ethernet cable, and a little stand for them. And then in an earpiece. And that's kind of our basic kit that we send out to a lot of folks. It is amazing how quickly it cleans up a lot of things. Just sending out that kit, is the thing that kind of fixes many, many things very quickly. Now, the way that it works, and go ahead and, you can ask questions as I'm going. I'm going to keep on talking. I have plenty to talk about as far as this goes. But if questions come up that you want to know specifically, but one of the things about it is, we'll put your questions into Makana so people can vote on them. So anyway, so what happened was that we would send out those kits. Those kits went out probably 2 weeks before the event. Then we had a team, Lori and Shannon basically called every single person. So we send out a questionnaire that asks about what kind of computer do you have and please go to speedtest.net, test your internet, tell us what it is. How far away are you from your router? So we knew what to deal with there. So there's a lot of basic information that we want to know. Then we get that helps us know what we're getting ourselves into. Kit goes out. There is a short tutorial on how to build the kit, little PDF and a little video on how to put up everything and some basic eye lines and things like that. So they had a guide to do that. Then essentially we then go through it. So Shannon or Lori calls each person. They get the whole kit up, and we're looking for where to do it. So every place we might have gone to 2 or 3 different locations for each person. And like figured out. Now, some of them we just know that's a great space, or they do things and they want to use that space. But a lot of them we moved them around. We're looking for eliminating natural. We don't want windows behind them. We're looking for natural light in front of them. Like, is that going to affect our show? We're going to figure out where to put their lights. Make sure that they get the headset in just the right place, so it's just a little behind. And it's all kind of set up there. We look for all the other issues. We annotate those issues. Typically, we want to have those lights have their own little stand so that they're not on the computer. In a perfect world, we don't want those stands on their desktop either. I mean, on their desk, because it vibrates, when they put their hands on it. So we tend to want to have that behind it when we can, but that doesn't always happen. Then we figure out all the lighting. So we really figure all those things out. Now, there's a temptation to try to do all of that before the show. There's a couple of reasons we don't do that. So we do this a week before the show, at least a couple of days before the show. Setting up a kit, even if it's simple, is stressful. It is just a stress point for people. They haven't done it. Most of them haven't done it before, or they've done it all the time and they tell us how they've done it all the time and they've got all the gear and you're just a professional, just professional. So if anyone's seen Man on Fire, I think about every time someone says I've done this all the time when they talk to me about doing an online event. Oh, I do this all the time. All I can think of is Man on Fire, where he goes, I'm just a professional. I'm tired of hearing that. So anyway, so so getting them over that hump, getting them to test the gear, and Shannon is a master of it. She'll sit there and we had one person in the event that was like, oh, I do this all the time. I do all these events, and let's just try to throw a light on. Oh, that's kind of nice. Let's try it. And she just like slowly worked it until she had the whole thing, and she realized that it just looked and sounded a lot better than what she had before, but sometimes you have to kind of guide people towards that process, and so it's persuading, that process. And some people come in and they're just ready. They want to look great. And one of the things we tell people a lot is like, they don't want to use it. We're like, hey, everybody else is using it. So just so you know, like, you will look different than everyone else if you don't do it this way. You'll stand out, and not in a good way. So we work with them to kind of get all those things worked out. You want them to be set up and then have this all under their belt. So on the day of the event, that they're not, a guest or a host. They're like a delicate flower. Like they are, like, their energy in the show is like this kind of ephemeral thing that can very, very quickly start losing petals if you start whacking it against the ground. And, them putting together their kit, them getting ready, them checking their connection is all going like this with that little flower, just like hitting against the wall, just smacking it. And by the time they get to the event, unless they're incredible professionals, they have a hard time finding their center again, so they just can't, they're frustrated. They're, now a broadcaster, you can have a disaster go off in front of Soledad O'Brien, and she'll just literally just go whoop and just turn on, because she's done it 1,000 times. She knows what it needs to look like, or a Katie Couric, or those folks will just flip a switch and they're on no matter what's happening around them. But an average expert, a person, a civilian that we're bringing into these things and putting in front of hundreds of people. This event was in front of, I think, 800 people or something. So it's a big space, right? our job, it's not just technical to produce the event. Our job is to make sure that we create an environment that we get the best performance out of every person that's connected. And that's what I think a lot of us miss when we're doing these events, is how do I make this as stressless as possible for the people that are there, and create a set of expectations that are going to get them there. Because one of the things that makes people upset is mixed expectations, so we set them up like, hey, we'd really like to see you an hour before the event. like we'd like to have you come into a green room an hour before the event. This is after we spent a bunch of time with them, prepping them. So getting them all ready to go and getting it all up to speed and everything else. We're going to spend all that time a day or two before. Now they're all set up. But what they'll do is they'll take things down and they'll move things out of the way and they'll do a bunch of other things. So we want to see them go into a green room. That green room is a shared green room. So that's not a singular green room when they come in the day of the event, and we try to get them to come in an hour before. They won't all do that because of course they do this all the time, right? So, but the folks that do look the best because we get some time to work with them. The interesting thing about it is that what's interesting is the other reason you don't want to set them up with each other is you don't want people to have trouble in front of their peers. It's an incredibly stressful thing to do to people. So you got a bunch of scientists, you got a bunch of experts. They are, they have an outer shell of who they are. Them futzing around with their Ethernet or can't figure out their light or can't get the mic in the right place in front of a bunch of their peers, super stressful. You will not get them back. Like they will not get into the event without being in their head if they had a bad setup time before the event in front of a bunch of their friends. It's just like you just need to. These are important people, and they have they have a self structure that gets broken. And we've seen it happen. We've prepped over 6,000 people. So it's like you just see like, oh, we lost them. Like it's in the early days we would just see, oh, and the reason we build all these things up is because we would see events where we realized we had a great person that we lost because they had a horrible experience right before the event trying to get set up. So this is why we built all these tools, all this protocol. So the protocol is we give them a kit. We won't work with anyone that won't let us send kits out. We just, nope. It's not our show. And once we get them in, we get them all set up. Then the day right before we have it, and that goes into a green room. That green room is its own Zoom meeting. Once Shannon's seen them, she gives them the link. And they go into the webinar. Once they go into the webinar, we're on comms. Now we're using ClearComm Eclipse system to do that. So we're sitting there talking to them all, and once they get into it, we try to remind people not to. What we don't want them to do is ever turn off their mic or their video, because Ryan, in this case, was running the audio. He can bring their mic up and down. We don't want them doing that for us. The other problem is that when we send them a link, each person is going into their own Zoom room. So we had a Zoom room for each one of these people that also had two outputs from that Zoom room. One is their presentation and the other one is them. And that way that goes into we have a constellation switcher. So this is all being switched on an ATEM constellation. So all the super sources and all the other bits and pieces are all done in the switcher. But what's really important for us, and what was a game changer for the rooms, was we had those two outputs. One was the person and one was their slides. So they can just run their slides as they like, but we can cut back and forth between all of those. And it's one person per computer. And that does create this process. So we had, Kevin Hansen was doing he's managing all these connections and bringing them all in. He's in comms. Shannon says they're ready, they're coming. He goes, okay. Brian checks their audio. Kevin Maurer, who isn't here, checks the video. That's all happening in the background while there's a show going on. But we're dealing with each person individually. What we don't have by not bringing them all into a webinar is a shared audio where it's a big mess. And so each person comes in. We've worked with them all. It's not perfect. I mean, it's not as good as if we had a staff on there with a camera, but they're much better, significantly better than everything else we see on a live event, because we sent those kits out, because we prepped them. They look nice and clean. Again, the audio, this is a $30 fix. Those pulse center piles with a converter is a $30 fix that improves their audio by 3 to 5 times. It is the best money ever spent on anything, is sending out these little headsets. The reason we don't send out other mics is because people don't know how to use them. You know, so Leo right now is in front of a mic, but he knows to lean into that mic when he's talking. A scientist, you know, talking that knows brain activity or whatever doesn't know that. So they're going to go like this. They're going to do all these other things. They're going to go in and out of mic. They're going to, you know, all these other pieces. By giving people a headset, a small headset, it just cleans that. They don't have to think about it. And now they're just connected. Yes, it's a lot of wires and they got to figure it all out, but it's worth it. And then, you know, the super sources were all, of course, pre-built. Those were all, you know, built in Photoshop, essentially. Kevin Maurer was building all those in macros. So we have 2 super sources available in the Constellation, which is why we have the Constellation. We don't need as many inputs or outputs that it has, but it has 2 super sources available to it. So we're able to very quickly macro to one and then cut to it and then macro to another. And you build all the different versions of what you might want to do ahead of time, along with the lower thirds and everything else. But the lower thirds were also, you know, just all pre-built and put in there. And so, you know, and then all of those ISOs, like all that audio is going out of those computers via Dante. It goes to Brian. You can ask questions for Brian too about the audio, but it goes from Dante to the QL5, which is what we were using there. The QL5, Brian's mixing all of that. That output goes to the Eclipse. The Eclipse goes back via Dante. Output of the QL5 goes via Dante to the Eclipse. The output of the Eclipse goes back to the computers individually. The reason that the Eclipse is downstream of the program, because the program goes out to the show, right? The reason that we, in this case, back into a webinar. So all of this is still a webinar. It's just that one frame has a ton of production behind it, and it goes back into a Zoom webinar. And just one of our Dells was just the input for that. It was a participant, you know, in that process. And so anyway, all of that rigmarole that we go through is to make sure that, because of the way it's set up, we can talk to any individual at any point in time during the event. So someone's on the show, let's say they're in a 4-up and one of them has a problem. We can tell Brian can pot them down. We can talk to them, have a conversation with them if we wanted to, and then fix it all and bring it back up, or tell them some note during the show. We have comms to every single person without anything. They don't have to do anything. They just connect to Zoom. And that's the big advantage, is we don't have to teach them how to do anything. We don't have to, by embedding those returns back into their point-to-point connection, we're able to completely control that. All questions, Jeffrey, go to Bacana, and we'll jump into the questions now.
Okay, Leo Mindell has our first one. Simply from London, were the kits returned or sent and left?
Right now, because of COVID, they're sent and left. We are getting the big kits back. So our big kits are $15,000 kits, $15,000 to $20,000 kits, and those are Blackmagic 6Ks with USB pre's, and they come in they're this huge beast that comes in 3 Pelican cases and another case in a tripod case or whatever, and they have to set that up by themselves. Which is they've gotten a lot of color coding to get that to work. Anyway, so they send those back, and then we clean them and we're letting them sit, and then we clean them and we'll prep them and have them go back out. So the big kits get sent back. The little kits, anything under $1,000, or really anything under $5,000 gets left as a party favor. The thing to remember is that if you were speaking at a conference, this is the way some of our clients are viewing it. If you were speaking at a conference, I would have flown you in. I would have put you up in a hotel. I'd pay for your food while you were there. I would pay, and all of that would be $3,000 to $5,000 for a lot of these conferences. That's what it would cost to bring that speaker in. Instead, what we're doing is we're giving them a bunch of hardware, and they get to keep it. And most of the vast majority of the kits that we're doing are between $500 or $400 and $750. Like that's the per unit. And all of those ones we used to, when we were doing these for Hangouts, we would get them back. So what we would do, and the key to getting kits back, by the way, is that you give people don't want to take your kits. They just don't want to deal with them. Right. So you have to kind of figure out how, like the big kits, we actually deliver, we send them to somebody to drop them off. We don't have FedEx drop them off because we don't know what FedEx is going to do. So we have them FedExed to a person. That person then drops them off at the house. That person then picks those up from the house. They transfer the data to us and everything. Because usually when we're using those kits, we're grabbing a terabyte of data back. For the little kits, when we were doing them for Hangouts, what we would do is we send them in a box. We make sure to give you the tape, literally the tape, that you can peel apart. You don't need anything else, that to close the box back. We give you a return label. We give you instructions on how to open it. We give you instructions on how to close it, how to put everything back in and put everything back in, you know, and then we give you a return label. And then most importantly, we give you a phone call. So the day after, we're like, hey, let us know if you have any trouble with that, blah, blah, blah. A week later, we call you again going, hey, we just haven't seen the kit yet. We just want to know if you have, and it's all around service. We haven't seen the kit yet, but we'd love to make sure that if you're having any trouble, let us know. You know, we're happy to talk you through getting everything back in. If you do it that way, and then a month later we call again and say, hey, we're just, you know, we haven't gotten the kit back, and are you having any trouble? But literally with that, it's usually pretty straightforward. The reason we would do that is nicely at what we call the velvet hammer. You know, like we just keep on tapping on people. We increased our return rates from about 35% to about 75%, 75, 78%, something like that. And so we lost 20%. And what we would do is we'd rent them, and we made the calculation of the loss in the rental to the clients. And so that kit was more expensive. It was about a $750, $800 kit that we rented to our clients for, I think, $250 or $300 each. So they got something they couldn't buy. And we had kind of a system that generated a little bit of margin and gave us a little bit of room for error for things to get lost. And so that's kind of how we've approached it so far as sending them out. But with COVID, we found that it was just, no one wants to see something used in COVID times. They want, you know, and the way we do it is we're wiping everything down, and then we are using UVC lights on them before we pack them, and then everybody's all covered up and with gloves and things. Leo?
I just taking that further. My actual feeling is that we are doing everything the same. We're sending out, leaving. And actually there's a huge benefit, I think, in doing it, is that we get in kind. You see that we send them the kits, and then they're using it for other events. Yeah. And then they remember who we are, and they want to use it again. And they remember, I mean, the simplest thing we've ever did with people, we always, when we send stuff or do any live event, we always tell people to wipe their webcam with a cloth before they go live. And it's like the smallest thing that makes the biggest difference that they've ever seen in their picture, especially if they're on a MacBook.
Oh my gosh. It is
covered in.
You're so right. If we don't send a camera out, the first thing that I ask them to do, whether I see it or not, I just go, hey, can you take a little cloth and just wipe this?
Yeah.
Wipe this.
We just tell them it took 5 years off them.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, and then the other thing to remember is that you're sending out, when you're sending those kits out, you're sending out a greeting card. So make sure that your branding is inside of it. There should be, if you have any trouble, go to this webpage. You know, like go to this thing. You know, you do it all not in the sense of don't be spammy. Like I hate spam. So don't be spammy, but just have your logo in lots of things that serve them. So the little instructions should have your logo and how to get a hold of you and everything else. The video on how to put the kit together, put that on your website, because that means a whole bunch of people are going to go to see a web page on your website or a video on your website that takes them to your website. You get to see what else they do. And you're sending off these two important people that will make decisions later. And if you don't think that's important, I mean, we worked with one company where did a bunch of work with them 2 years before. It's a pretty big company now. And when they decided they want to do more live streaming, the CEO who we had done work with just said, oh, just call Alex. He'll fix that. And next thing, and that was, a lot of work this year, was just because that person knew us, not because of anything we did officially, but because of the getting the kits and working with us and everything else. They just knew that we knew how to do what we were doing, especially if you put out good events. These are all executives and everything else. The only other thing I'll say is that the new thing that we added that has turned out to be really a big add is we put a little white box. I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but put a little white box in one of the kits, and we wait until everything's all set up and everything else, and they're all done. They're oftentimes sweaty and frustrated. These are the big kits. And there's like, and I said, there's one more thing. And they're like, okay, whatever. And you're like, can you just open that little box over there? There's a little white box, in the last box. And they open it up, cookies. It's cookies and candy and like little breath mints. And and when you open it up, it's craft services, it says craft services, just those, and about half of the people that have seen it are just like, that was amazing. Like, it sets the delivery at a whole different level when you do that, because you thought about something that was just little, but also think about that presentation. The other thing we think about when we send those kits out, how are they going to pull it apart? And is it going to be easy? It cannot be an art project. Like it is. We spent weeks figuring out how to build a kit so that it's easy to take it up, to open it up and put it in. You know, don't just think you're going to put a bunch of things in a box and send it to people. You have to think about the presentation. Apple does that really well, but you're going to open the box. That first thing has to be the first thing that they're going to use, not take this out and put it on the table and take this out and don't think through all of those things. Then we color code everything so that we can say, grab the yellow knob, grab the red knob, plug the orange into the orange. Much simpler, you know, and it's much easier to do when you're helping them online, is to have them match colors than words or numbers or anything else. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was wondering about this is kind of a party pooper question, is what's the tax liability when you're sending out these $3,000 to $4,000 packages? Do you have to 1099 them? Do they have to count that as income when they keep them? Does what liability involved? And
technically,
you write it off as an expense?
Technically, they're still ours. They just happen to be stored at their house. You know, so we didn't give them.
That survive an audit.
We don't do that many that are that big. Usually they're like $400 items, you know, $400 kits. So and those in between ones, you know,
if you don't go over $500, you don't have to 1099.
Yeah.
I thought it was 7.
Yeah. We do pay for those, pay our sales tax for it. So we still own them. We didn't do a transfer of ownership. So I think that it would be, you know, complicated to, next question.
Moving on, Andy Carluccio of Washington, D.C., and here on the panel says, how did the talent respond to the process of setting up the gear? Was it daunting, or were they happy with the guided process?
Most of the time, they're happy with the guided process. And of course, when you're dealing with someone like Shannon has done thousands. Like, you know, like, so she has the ultimate, like, and these are, it got to the point, to put it in perspective, that Richard Branson would jump on the line and go, "Hello, Shannon," you know, like, you know, and so, but she's worked with heads of state and CEOs and everything else, and so her like demeanor is perfect. It isn't something. It is tempting to say you're going to hand this off to someone that you just hired and you're paying them $20 an hour to go through this, but for the events that we work on, it's super important. These are House of Representatives, these are you know, world leaders, these are CEOs, these are actors, these are musicians. We cannot, you know, it is a highly skilled, experienced person that gets on the line with them to walk them through that stuff. It may not be that way for every event that people work on, but for us, that's mostly what we do. And so we have, you know, it's a highly skilled, and then I'm usually somewhere in the back end. You know, if they're having audio, sometimes Brian will get pinged. If they're having other setup problems, you know, so if she has any kind of, she can handle 90% of their technical problems. And then I get brought in. I don't usually show up for those, but I know when the schedule is, and I try to schedule the rest of my meetings around them. And I'll get brought in to fix a problem. Like, oh, that person has that little setup issue with whatever they're doing, and I'll come in and work on it. Now with the bigger kits, I usually am scheduled and I walk through the whole building of the kit with them if they want to. Some of them will be pre-set up, but I'll be there and we'll do it step by step together to make sure it works. Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, and I guess Shannon would get an exact copy of the same kit that they have, so she's familiar with them.
Yep. She has the same copy. We're oftentimes, like what I'm using right now is most of the last system that we sent out. So we're constantly using it. And then we have a reference kit. So whoever's doing the setup, it's not just that Shannon's using a kit that they're using. She has another kit that is all the pieces of what they're using. So she can pick it up and show it to them. And she can, you know, she can show them setting it up. So having a reference kit of what you're sending out is super important, so that you can literally, and we've had a couple events where we literally had a person, another one in our staff, sitting there, you know, putting things on, and us being able to cut to it to show them like how it works. And so all of those little added services make this a lot better and make it a lot cleaner. But Shannon definitely has it. She's using the kit typically that they're using with them, even though she has a better kit. When she's doing it, she'll be using the same kit that they're using. You know, mostly. And then she has another reference kit. We always buy one extra kit with all of these, or build one extra kit as the reference kit that we can always show them and test it. And if they're having trouble, we figure out why they're having trouble with it. And it's really useful. We've had ones where, you know, the bigger kit, some of the early ones, when you FedEx them, things would come apart, like the wall warts would come out and stuff like that. And so being able to take a flashlight and point in there and go, this is what you're trying to plug back in. It's a little embarrassing, but we were able to fix it. Next question. We've got a lot of questions, and I will run a little heavy on this one.
We have a lot of questions, and this one was a little far back, but like a horse coming up in a race and just blowing everybody away. Laura Seals from Greensboro said, Shannon's process of working with the attendees to set up their kits, test, troubleshoot, and improve so they're ready for air seems like the magic sauce. How can we get some insight into that? Does she work off a checklist? What are the unsolvable roadblocks and her most frequent issues and so forth?
We'll do another. She did one. I don't know if it was recorded. It was early on where she talked about participant prep. We'll get her back on. So we'll maybe even as early as next week, but this month we'll get her to come on and just answer questions. I think it's easier than I can answer some of the questions, but what will be best to just have Shannon come on and answer questions for you. She's really good at that. Anyway, next question.
Great call. Jeffrey Widgren.
It is, by the way, just to back up for Laura though, the one thing I will say is that participant prep is the magic sauce. Like it is the magic sauce. Like that is what makes these events great, is not the tech end of it. It is how much effort we put into preparing the presentation, and the back end and how you process it and how you get people in. It is the magic sauce. Go ahead, Leland.
One thing we did for the Public Health Institute event was we created a Google form so that we could simply do an existing equipment evaluation of everything.
We did the same thing.
Location, so that you knew what you were up against. And then all of this was transported into a data sheet that we could refer back to once we were in the process of actually going through each individual and prepping them for the event. We could go through and know that if this person had low bandwidth, or if this person had a 4-core CPU, or if they had a 720p webcam, we had to either implement a new process or at least work with what they had, knowing that they could run into complications during the event. Right. We were ready for that. We would have them highlighted as potential, areas.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we would, if we were doing a per seine event, what we called a per seine event. Per seine is a fishing term of, you throw something in the water and whole thousands and thousands of tuna show up, and you run a big net around them and you pull them into a thing. So we had what we called a per seine event. A per seine event means that I'm going to be with a star, and there's going to be 10 spots that fans can jump into, but I'm going to get 900 to 1,000 applicants. And so for a per seine event for us, what we would do is you put that form out, and then we just pre-eliminate everybody that like we would just, you would just get, I don't think they knew how important that form was. If they didn't fill it out properly, they were gone. If their bandwidth is too low, they're gone. And that's how you make great events, is that if you can get the draw, you draw out and you pick and then we would pick, based on, all kinds of different diversity targets and so on and so forth around where they are in the world and what their background is and what they're, those would be the things that we would kind of fine tune to get the right piece. Next question.
Moving on to Jeffrey Widgren of Overland Park. A lot of customers want to use Zoom because their people are familiar with it. In your experience, on a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar were the people when it came to actually getting set up and ready? And what do you find that they are most unprepared for?
People who have never used Zoom are actually much easier to work with than people who have used Zoom, because people who have used Zoom are full of a lot of opinions that aren't based that aren't ready for events. So they have, what we get from them, as I said before, is, I do this all the time. And, the thing that gets you the most is that they're not ready to have good audio, good backgrounds. They, it's very amateur. It's, but they think because they've done that amateur version for a long time that they know what they're doing. And so it's just hard to break through that. That's the biggest challenge that we have, is breaking through that. People who haven't done it very often, they're just like, what do I got to do? And you say, okay, put this in. Okay. And then they just do it. And they end up looking generally better and sounding better and presenting better than the folks that have the most experience in our experience. And beyond the experience, it's also the education level. Higher the education level, the harder it is to get what we need. Go ahead, John.
I think that, and Leland can attest to this too, a lot of the people that we talk to are on Wi-Fi. And so sending out 100-foot length of cable to have them plug it in during the event seems to be the
we don't send out 100, but we do send out 75. 75 is our standard issue, and almost all of our kits go out with a 75-foot Ethernet. One thing we get from the Q&A, and one thing we ask about before we send it out, is what kind of computer, what kind of connection does it have? so that we know what kind. And with some kits, we just send out all the different converters that you would need. You know, like there's like 3 different converters. You can plug it into whatever you're going to plug it into, and we can get you connected to your router. We found that if we didn't send it or offered to send it later, that, oh, it's too much trouble. If it's just in the kit, it's inconvenient. The other thing you have to get over is being inconvenient. You know, in the early days, we would tread lightly because the person was really important or the person was whatever. And I got just destroyed by an executive assistant for a very high level CEO for being soft with him when we were getting set up. She was like, the only thing that matters is what he looks like during the show. Like, I get that he doesn't want to do it, but you needed to get it. We still need to make it work because he's now in front of, 1,500 people and he doesn't look as good as he could have, and it was like a half an hour me being yelled at about it from someone that, from an executive assistant for a CEO of a, Fortune 10 company. And she's a little rough. so we got along after that, but I got that you have to be willing to make people uncomfortable in that setup. And it's also why we do it a day or two before, is because we're going to ask them to do all kinds. Hey, can you move that? Can you move this thing in the background? Can you tune this up? Let's run a cable. Let's do this. Let's rearrange your entire office. I mean, like we are willing to make those requests because we know that what they're going to care about, what they're going to remember is what they look like during the show, not all the setup. Go ahead, Leo.
Exactly the same. I deal with senior politicians and ambassadors for countries.
Yeah.
And the number of them that come on in the first minute tell me how they've got big boy trousers, they know how to do this, they've done it all before, what am I teaching them how to do this, and then apologize afterwards that we've made their view on screen about 100 times better than anything they've ever been on before, because they just don't do it. They just don't want to do it until they realize that. And
what's amazing is that the broadcasters don't do it to them. We had a person on that's on almost every network. She's on nearly every network talking about international security and everything else a couple times a week, and Shannon spent a couple hours with her getting it all right and we were early enough that she was able to order the extra things that she wanted and everything else. And she said in 2 hours of working with Shannon, she had covered 10 times more ground than every broadcaster had. They just turn on whatever she has and it was fine. And then funny, the next thing we saw her on the news and she looks great.
We've had exactly the same. I've turned on the BBC and I've gone, we fixed that one.
Yeah.
And you're like, why? And 2 weeks before you saw the same person on the BBC going, they're rubbish.
Yeah.
And we knew they were coming up and we went, let's get into there. And they just didn't bother. They just didn't bother.
And the balance is you do have to be appropriate and soft about it. This is a really soft touch. This is really, a fine, it's why we don't hand it off to folks that haven't done it a lot, for most of these events. And we're slowly training a couple people around Shannon. They sit there next to her and watch what she does, and then does some of them with her there. It's a very slow training, like months and months and months of training to get a new person up to prep, because because you have to ask the right way. Go ahead, Leland, real quick. I got tons of questions. So
that we received in response to the way we treated all the speakers, including, attorney generals and what have you from across the U.S. We got more response back on how we treated the speakers before the event and how they were prepped and ready for the event. Some didn't prep, and we saw the difference during the production. You could tell who was not ready with lighting, who was not ready with camera, who was not ready with mic, and they blurted our name out at the end of the production because of what that brought to the table.
Right.
So for an event producer to take the tech team and announce them live in a broadcast is almost unheard of.
Yep. But it's from the speaker prep that does that, not from the event. You have to make clean, but the speaker prep is really what sets us apart. Next question.
Courtney Gooden of a panel in Hollywood says, how did you build the rounded corner boxes for the 2-up windows? Was that in the Constellation switcher?
Yeah, so you can choose to do an underlay or overlay with the super source. And so we just chose to do an overlay. So we just so you just have the graphic with an alpha channel and you just paste it over top rather than underneath it. And we do that just to mess with. I have to admit that we do rounded corners because it's kind of the fashion in a lot of things, but you can't usually do that in a broadcast truck because they want to put all the, in broadcast they want to put the text. And I'm glad that you noticed it because we do it kind of on purpose just to mess with broadcasters because we can do something they can't do. And anyway, yeah, like they're like what, and so so all it is just it's just the masking. So in all the ATEM switchers that are doing super sources, you can put the graphic under or over, and we just put it over. And that's what solves that. Jayson,
you just give them hexagons just for kicks.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Lou Perez in Phoenix says, did you run into any network speed issues and how were those resolved?
You always do. You always run into some. You do the best you can. So when most people have a connection that if they use a wired connection and they get everybody else in the house to not be connected, they'll look fine. Like most people have enough bandwidth to pull that off. But you're still going to get some drop, admittedly, because we're doing 1080p connections, because we were using the room and because we requested 1080p. You will see a couple little drops in it because Zoom, is giving you all that all the stuff. There's another reason they don't give you 1080p is because it breaks up more. People don't have great bandwidth, and so you will see a little bit of breakup. But mostly it's getting people to not do anything else in their house while they're on a show. And we, a lot of it is that it's educating people that you just have to remind them you're in front of 800 people. Like I get that you're coming in from your home, but you're still in front of 800 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. You want to take that into account. Like when you prep your house, is maybe your kids, need to not watch something right now, or maybe people need to take a little break for the 1 hour that you need to do what you're doing because you're in front of 800 people. And I think people need to kind of sometimes get their head around, what would you do if you were going to walk up on a stage in front of 800 people, and how important it is for you to do that. And because we use Zoom all the time, people get very relaxed and just think, no, it's okay. But when you scale that up, a lot of times I talk to people about anything's okay. Like, all of this stuff's easy. And when we go to a barbecue with our friends, we can wear shorts and, a t-shirt and have floppies, flip flops on. We probably wouldn't do that in front of 1,000 people, so as executives, and you just remind them of that. And then that usually has them kind of go, oh yeah, that's right. And then they do whatever they're going to do. Next question.
Laura Seal from Greensboro is back with, what if the constellation goes down? What's the built-in redundancy for that?
So we have two constellations that are set up. Those two constellations go into two 40 by 40 routers. Those two 40 by 40 routers have, we have bit tree, basically patch panels. So we can literally hard patch our way out of something or reroute it inside of the routers to rebuild the show relatively quickly. Would it be seamless? Probably not seamless, but it would be, we might have to put up a slide for a minute and then we'd be back into the show and full featured show. Brian had two CL5s, that are there that can be, that everything's routed to both of them. And we've got extra computers. We usually always have 2 or 3 spare computers that are ready to jump in if one of them's having issues. And the computers are probably the connection computers are probably the thing we have the most trouble with. They're just funky, and one of them doesn't want to work this way, or someday it doesn't. Dante can't see it, and so those are the things that go. But we definitely have backups to the backups to the backups for what we're doing, so that we can get out of it. And have we used them? Not very often, but when we do, we're really glad that they exist. And it is, I admit, one of the nice things about hardware, like we have that we can, grab onto things and move them around in very fast order. And there are backups to that. And then we have two 500 meg internet connections, that are, and then for the fall, we had a generator outside. Brian would go out and turn the generators on before every event, just because we had some issues with Northern California and we were not 100% sure that we'd be on. I don't think we ever had to switch over to the generators, but all of everything was running through UPSs that were running it. The UPSs would give us, I think, a couple minutes, of time, and that would be enough for the generators to cross over. So that's the other layer of backup, for the system. Go ahead, Leland.
I just wanted, as far as redundancy's sake, I definitely have the UPS connected for both the machines that are here. And not only that, but while we broadcast live, we had Doug Ferguson in Indiana and doing his thing exactly in time with what I was doing.
Yep.
We had Philippe doing his backup runs for playout videos in the other end of the world. So we always had another feed available that could be flipped to immediately in case one of us went down. There was no relying on a single separate feed to take care of the whole broadcast.
You definitely want to think about that. Single point of failure is something we talk about a lot. Next question.
Chris Fritchie, often on the panel from Tomball, Texas, says, Alex, can we see the link to that kit video you mentioned as well as your diagram? Also, what's included in the kit?
There's some stuff in that kit. There's some logos and other things in there that I can't post it publicly. But I'm about to do another more generalized kit tutorial, and I'll post that when we have that up. It'll be in the next couple of weeks because we have to have a new kit set up to do that. I apologize. It's just when we build these, we don't think about them as something we're going to push out publicly, and then I go, oh, I can't show that and that and that. So, but I will work on. We're working on one that's generalized, so I don't have to keep on making them. So when we get the generalized ones up of the kits, we'll show them to you. Next question.
Greg Gibson, Washington, D.C. How are you capturing the PowerPoints? Are the presenters driving them directly?
Presenters are driving them directly. The way that the Zoom rooms work is that we can define one output is a Zoom room, and the other output, the one output is the presenter and the other one is their slide deck. So it's literally a screen share. When they do screen share, we're getting their output. Because they're doing screen share, it's not taking over the Zoom because it doesn't need to. It's taking over, it's just going out to another output from that PC. So we get two feeds into our switcher. One is what their screen share is and them at full resolution. And as a result, we're able to just cut back and forth between them, build the super sources, do all the other bits and pieces. So it's a really secret sauce. It's so much better. Like I would never use anything other than Rooms just because of that feature. I can tell you that we have gone through all kinds of hoops to do it other ways. We've literally done, USB over IP with a DSAN clicker, and we've done GoToMeetings and all kinds of other stuff. It's insane, of what we've done. Let's go to the next question. We're gonna have to move really fast through these.
Ricardo Hicks.
We're heavy, and I'm going to answer most of the questions. I'll throw it over to Brian a little bit, but I apologize for everyone. I want to get through all the questions, but we'll do the best we can. Next question.
Ricardo Hicks, Raleigh, North Carolina. How are you sending program feeds to the Zoom rooms? AJA SDI dongles from the Constellation?
All the room computers have either Blackmagic Duos or 8Ks in them. So they have 4 inputs or any definable IO into them that we can send to them. We can't do Zoom out over those cards. Not that I'm bitter, but we can do all the video input. So they're all routed to those Decklink cards are what we're using there. Next question.
Alan Scott of New Brunswick, Canada says, how much bandwidth did you use for all the Zoom rooms?
I think it crests at about 120 megs a second. 120 megabits a second is about, with all the rooms and all the bits and pieces and all the back and forth. You're talking about a 1080p. You're talking about 6.5. It might not be, maybe a little less than that, but I think that's what I calculated for. But it's like 6.5 megs per, and then you've got the room connection, you've got the backup room connection, and then you've got, so there's a, the 1080p I think is running about 6.5 or 7 megs a second, and then we have 2 of those from, when people are doing presentations. So those are a couple different bits and pieces to that. But yeah, you need and then you want it to be redundant. Like when you do what I'm doing, it definitely is, you need to have its infrastructure to do it. Next question.
Leland from the panel in Corona, Michigan says, was there a specific reason why your playback was full screen and unbranded versus the composites created for the speakers who were live?
Because it was most people, when they spend a lot of money on a video, they just want it to be full screen. So they want to take over the screen and be the whole thing. So that's usually for playback, we end up with full screen.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I was going to do the same type of thing with those that I recorded ahead of time, or we had a lot of side videos that we were going to do that we closed captioned after the fact, or prior to the event. We closed captioned those videos for playback. And I was curious whether I should just leave them full screen or skin them like we did the rest of the presenters, like you did with the branding. And I just wanted to find out what your first
it's just
take
that
on
if you're putting in, those add a lot of production value, and so we want to add that production value back into it, you know, to let it go full screen and make it feel bigger. Next question.
Moving on this time to Jim E. of Louisville. Do you provide production behaviors that the attendees should or should not do while on camera?
Most of what we do, so we are a pretty heavy duty webinar company. We do a couple meetings here and there. Now my wife, all she does is webinar meetings or Zoom meetings. That's what she does for a living, is Zoom meetings, and I do webinars. And so the two of us kind of talk about the two. It's like we talk about the other world of that. And so, but you know, a lot of times we don't have a lot of the attendees themselves, and I'm defining attendees specifically as people that aren't the panelists. We definitely talk to the panelists about what not to do, you know, just to remind them of what they're doing, and we can talk to each one of them during the event to tell them not to do that. For the attendees, we don't have to usually talk to them that much, because we just tell them where the question and answer is and where the bits and bobs are, because we're not bringing them, you know, on stage, you know. So if we're doing meetings, then you definitely you decide what those rules of engagement are. Do they have to leave their cameras on? Do they have, you know, do they, you know, obviously muting and self-muting and so on and so forth is important. So anyway, if you're talking about attendees, we don't give them a lot of stuff because they're never going to be on camera. You know, for us, panelists will be. Next question.
Leo Mendel, who was here in the panel from London, I don't think he's here now, said, I know you've mentioned before on-screen graphics. However, I find with these types of events, if someone misses the first minute, they don't generally know who's speaking. What are your thoughts on that?
We don't like to leave graphics up all the time. We like to bring them up. We may bring those lower thirds up a couple times if someone's speaking for a long time, but we try not to. I just find it to feel a little too corporate if they're up all the time. It's just not something we're used to in broadcast. So I think that, you know, every 5 to 10 minutes, if someone's talking ongoingly, putting up their lower third makes sense for about 7 seconds. You know, so 2 seconds in, 2 seconds out, 5 seconds in the center, if there's any kind of transition. But that's about it from our perspective. And I think that just comes from our broadcast background, is that it feels really uncomfortable to leave someone's name up there the whole time from our perspective. Next question.
Maggie Barton Baird from Edmonton, Canada. When you talk about these green rooms, are they in Zoom themselves?
Yeah. So the green rooms are another Zoom room. And so I will say that Grant is probably more advanced in the way he does that than we are. They are not breakout rooms or not something else there. They are actual, because we're doing webinars and we're going to set, or because we're doing single point-to-points, they are a Zoom room, and then we give them the link for them to go into the point-to-point. Our next version of this will be just they join the point-to-point, and then we use hardware routing to take care of them. They don't have to do anything, but that's just more hardware we haven't put in yet. Next question.
Jimmy of Louisville says, how do you handle folks that have a low tolerance for technology?
I mean, you just really have to work with them to have them understand that they're going to be in front of a lot of people. Our job is to make them look good. You know, like that's what you're doing. Our job is to make them not be embarrassed by the video that they watch later of themselves in the video. You know, that's all we're trying to do. And so, and then you do have to be very, very patient. You know, because it doesn't, just because they're not used to technology doesn't mean that they're not smart people. Like a lot of them are very smart people. They just don't understand the tech. And so, and you try to make them comfortable, and you try to find ways to talk about what you're doing there, and also try to be succinct. And the more you know how to build it, and the less you're wandering around with them, the better. You know, like that's why it's so important to have someone really skilled at interacting with people. It's super important, because you being confused and being, well, let me see, really exacerbates the problem, which is why we have highly skilled prep people to do this stuff. Go ahead, Jason, real quick.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, you have to know an order of magnitude more than what you are teaching so that it is completely front of mind no matter what.
It's not just knowing it, it's knowing how to say it, knowing how to describe it, knowing how to, like, I will sit there and I have a very specific way that I tell people to bend. Like when I tell someone how to bend their headset, you'll see me just go, you want to take your thumb, put it right under your ear like this, then take this finger, grab onto this and pull it out, and it's not just knowing how to do it, it's knowing how to describe it and knowing how to say it in the few number of words possible, to make that work. Next question.
Moving on to Frank Haney of Ottawa, who says, if you aren't sending a computer out, how do you deal with computer issues, driver problems, malware, and so forth?
You just do the best you can. I mean, for the most part, these kits, if we're sending out a simple kit, there aren't that many drivers. It's a webcam, it's plugged in. It's not, we try to do all the pre-build of that. It's very rare for us to have a point where the kit that we send out as the small kit doesn't work. Like it is, it's not, everything's showing up without drivers. Everything is kind of just appearing. So we think about that a lot, of not sending things out that would require drivers, is something that we think about. So the biggest problem we have is people not having enough USB connections. Like that is the number one problem we have, is they don't have anywhere to put it. So a lot of times we send out little breakouts just to make sure that there might be some work that we have to do with them to get them to swap it, but they don't have to go buy it. Is some kind of breakout system that we send them just to extend one of their USB-C or even USB-A connections. Next question.
Paul Wallace here in the panel from Austin, Texas, as normal. Alex, what's on your wish list for doing future events? What features would you like to add, and what would you like to change?
I think that we bid on an event that I felt like was the future, and we just haven't. It didn't go through, but that we had an event that was going to happen in Africa that was 15,000 people, diplomats mostly, that were going to all be in Zoom rooms. So we're going to have hundreds of Zoom, or not hundreds, but 75 or 100 Zoom rooms. But then we have all the speakers coming in on point-to-points. We then take them and do what we're doing here and feed them back to all of those rooms at the same time. We then take that single signal and replicate it so that all of them can be in Zoom rooms, but all of them can go into breakouts, into little 5-person breakouts and discuss things and then come back. We unify all of their Q&A and chat with Mukana. So they can chat with each other in their own little rooms, in their own chat, but they can build out into something wider. We take the finished product that we're sending to all those rooms, we put them on YouTube and Facebook and et cetera. We then take that signal and put it for the press pool to go into, any of the press can pull it down, put it on satellite so that anybody that has a downlink can pull it down, and then stream it as make it available to radio stations so they can pull it up, as discussing, issues. To me, like when you think about, like, I think that once those kinds of events, and I think this year will end up, when someone asks us to bid on something that doesn't go through, it just means it's a little early, but that's going to go through. And when a couple of those events turn the corner, the whole thing will break open. That's an event that you could never put back in it used to be a physical event. When that event happens once, it is the end of that physical event. Like because you can't ever put it back in the box, and that's there might be a physical expression, or maybe 20 physical expressions. You might have 20 rooms coming in. But I think that, what I'm interested in is how do we atomize the idea of an event, have people gather where it makes sense, even past COVID. Have 50 people in Nigeria and 50 people in Rwanda and 50 people in Bangkok and 50 people in Tokyo, all part of an event, a big event where they're all equal to that process. They can all hang out with each other and have bagels, but they don't have to travel, and they can be part of that. But individuals on their computer can be part of that. And I think that all the tools are there to do it. And it's just a matter of finding the right couple of, it will take one or two of these events, because what happens, of course, you have all these decision makers in those events. So if that event goes really well, it's a chain reaction, and then at that point, so we're just waiting for that to turn the corner, and we keep on building it up and bidding on it to get people to think about it. I think that we're pretty close. Next question.
Jonas Tuttle of Reutlingen, why are you using the USB pre for your kits and not the mix pre, Alex?
I do use the mix pre's. That's what we send out. If we're going to send something out, if we're going to send that out, we send mix pre's out because they're less expensive than the USB pre. I'm using a USB pre here just because I have one, and the mix pre's were somewhere else. So we used to send the USB pre's out because the mix pre didn't exist. The USB pre is simpler. It's easier for me to send somebody and they just plug it in and it works. But they're more expensive and larger. And we can't control them remotely. When we send a computer out with it, we can actually log in via Wingman and control the mix pre and so on and so forth. So, and it has noise assist and, you know, all that other stuff. The stuff we did for Dolby that we sent the kits out, those have little mix pre's that we had noise assist on them, and wow, sounds great. You know, so noise assist and a good headset and a Countryman H6 is it's good mix. Next question.
Keenan Campbell at Princeton, Illinois says, are you using Mac Minis for each speaker and then connecting them to the Constellation?
We are currently using Dells. I can't remember the exact Dell, but it's about $2,200. That's what I know it is. But it's a Dell i7 Dell with Decklink cards in them and then connected over Dante. We are about to experiment with the Mac Minis. So when we get the Mac Mini stuff sorted out, that'll be the next step for us to go down to test those. I think that they're going to work just as well, but I'm not 100% sure. There's more GAC coming out the back because of the. But if we don't worry about if the audio and the video, getting the video into it just means I got another piece of hardware that I have to use. Whereas the deck links are nice because they're just built into the machine. So I'm trying to figure that out. But it's a big cost difference between the Mac Mini and the Dell. I can fit a lot of GAC into that cost difference. So that's kind of, if you know, and again, you know, I am looking at what Courtney had suggested on little PCs. And I will admit that some of it is just that I just know Mac's better. So if I want to add things or build other things into it, I just know how to do it. And there's a certain labor cost in there that I consider. Next question. We're just going to, and I apologize for not jumping to everybody, but I'm trying to burn through these. We're really heavy and I'm heavy and I got work to do.
I just got to bail, Alex. I hate to cut short, but I got to run to the hospital for my father. So I appreciate it, everyone.
Good luck.
Bye. We'll see you around. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Leland.
Hector Rodriguez is next from Springfield, Virginia, and he says, can you talk about event stats, number of attendees, average minutes views, and other data to measure the return on investment?
I don't know if I can talk about this one specifically with all the stats. I do think it was about 800 attendees. You know, so a lot of our events that we work on, it's not, and the events range from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of people watching the events that we're working on. And so the number does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as one would think, only because it depends on who they are. I've done the most important one I think I've ever done was for 50 people, but those 50 people controlled about $3 billion of money, you know, like, so, you know, like it's, I'm sorry, not 3 billion, $3 trillion of money. So those bankers. So, or even banking organizations anyway. So you don't worry, you know, depending on every organization, they have to decide what the ROI is. It's not necessarily a consumer ROI where you need lots of people. It's the who's watching and what that means. Next question. I'll go ahead, John Preto.
Was it a paid event, Alex?
I don't think it was. I think it was invite only. I don't think it was a paid event. I think it was invite only though, to get in. Next question.
Moving on to Robert Laney, who asks, what's the minimum internet speed you consider acceptable on the presenter's end? And what do you do if a presenter's internet speed isn't acceptable?
We consider 5 megs a second if they're doing 720 and 8 megs a second if they're doing 1080p as our minimum recommended. We're looking for, 8 to 10 is what we're looking for, for most of those things. And if we get something significantly below that, if it gets a little below that, we might mention it to the client that they could be a little rough. If it gets below 5 megs a second, there's warning emails that go out. Like, they're just, like, hey, we're really worried about how that person's going to look. They might want, and we've taken things where we move people to other locations. It's a little harder now with COVID. So I've often moved people to their office, other people's offices, other people's houses, locations. We work, not we work, but the other one, I can't think of it right now, but the one that preceded WeWork, but the places that we can find guaranteed internet. So it just depends on how high profile and how important it is to get them that connection. Some people, we've actually made their home connection better for a month by just calling AT&T and throwing money at them. So next question.
Michael Peters of Oakton, Virginia says, what's the model microphone that you send out on your kits?
The little kits get sent the either the Polson, I can't think of the brand name, but little Polson, Polsen, or the Pile. These are little $15 mics with a converter. The bigger kits get Countryman H6s. Black Countryman H6s. It tends to be what we go with, for those, and it's kind of either or, because they have to be headsets, and I don't find that a lot of the headsets are any better. Dual ear headsets, single ear we did once. We're not happy. Very sad. Like it worked, but things are swinging and people are upset, and you just can't keep. If you have an A2 putting it on you, it kind of works, but when you do it by yourself and you've never done it before, it's a nightmare. And so because there's nowhere to slide it back, so they have to like build some kind of weird structure if their head's too small, that kind of thing. Next question.
Jim E. of Louisville asked, how do you price your conference services?
We have X number of days of prep depending on the service, X number of rehearsal day or days depending on how big the event is. Then you have the event day. So we figure that out. We figure out how complicated it is and how big the crew is for each piece of those things. And then we typically charge a per person cost for, depending on the kit, that's the kit and the prep. And it's per, so if you have 13 people, it's 13 times whatever that number is. And then it's plus the prep for it, plus the rehearsal, plus the show. I don't have a specific number because it changes depending on every client, but usually the smallest shows that we do are probably in the 15 range, and the largest shows are really expensive. Next question.
Jim E. says, is there a typical ratio of your staff to the number of participants? What are your metrics?
It's not really a staff to participants. It's staff to what we're doing, like how much. I've done ones where I do the whole thing by myself, if it's small enough, or usually it's never less than 2. It's usually Shannon and I will do it, where Shannon's prepping people and I'm running the show, and I'm doing that through Vimeo Live. And it's that's a really simple little show, and then, when we start having all these point-to-points, then we're going to have Brian managing audio, and we'll have, Kevin managing those connections, and Kevin Maurer doing the switching. And then usually I'm kind of free floating, kind of putting my finger in the dam where I see water going when the events get larger, and you need someone like that. Everyone else is doing their job. You need a technical person that's able to jump in and fix things because they have a free mind to do it, and they're not caught up in what needs to get done next. And it seems like an extra cost, but it's not. Next question.
Only 2 more to go. Leo Mandela has the first one out of London. Do you have a parts list you can put into Discord on the components set out?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. I'll see if I can get that list real quick. I don't have it right with me, but we'll get it in today. Remind me tomorrow if I don't get it in today, and I'll put it in tomorrow. Next question.
And the last one, Nolan Maurice of Minneapolis says, how do you get through to talent to work on setup prior to an event when they're being blocked by management or booking agents and so forth?
The thing that I've said before that we just say over and over again is our job is to make everybody look good. We're spending a lot of time with everybody else. And if we don't get the time to spend to make them look good, they may not look good. And I usually send that in email, and that is that's my nice way of saying, we'll have this, if things don't work out, I've just pushed you right in front of the bus, here's the bus, and I've now just coaxed you out. So if you don't want me to do that, and we internally talk about the fact that we're going to make everyone look good, or they're going to learn a really good lesson, but we can't, you can't fix it for you can't fix it for everyone. And we'll get off the phone with someone who's just sure that this is the way they should do it. And we're like, well, this one will be a lesson, it's not, there's nothing I can do about that. We push pretty hard, people will get pretty dire emails from us about what's going to happen if we don't get to do what we're trying to do. And the reason we use email is to leave a paper trail. That is and we've definitely used the paper trail, so when people are upset after the event, we're like, well, here are the 6 emails that we sent that said this may not turn out if we don't get to do this, and this. And so, we don't do it. We try not to be a pain about it, and what we really want is just to be able to do what we're paid to do. But we do lay out a paper trail as a way to protect ourselves from conversations later. Go ahead, Sky, and then I'm going to close this
just
up.
real quick, and I know you have to go. Your comment that I'm really learning is it's easy to watch, or it's easy. How do you say that?
Well, we tell
where is
people a
that in the
lot
calculation?
when we're talking to folks is that all live streams or all content is easy to watch or to experience, or it's easy to make, but it's rarely both. And so almost never. Like, you just got to decide where you're putting the work. Are you putting the work on the viewer to call out something good out of the goop that you're throwing at them, or are you going to make it easy and enjoyable for them? And so people who tend to be successful in events tend to want to make it as, are paying attention to all the things of how do I make everything, easier and more enjoyable for the participant, to make that work. And so anyway, we definitely talk about that with clients a lot too. So anyway, well, hopefully that was useful. This is the beginning. We'll do a couple talks like this, but I think that what we're leaning towards is somewhere in February or March, I'm going to try to collect a lot of us that are doing these kind of crazy events. And I think I'm going to call it hot rodding your Zoom, and talk about how we're disassembling Zoom and making it a bigger thing, so that people can start getting a vision of that. I want to do that before people get too obsessed with going back to physical. So we'll grab a couple people to do presentations. I think what we're going to do is break it up into evening presentations and have them be like 2 hours. And I'm going to eat my own dog food and not try to do a 1-day event or 2-day event. It's going to be like every evening will be a different, talk, that people can do over a week or two. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. Thank you all. Most of you stuck with it. Thank you all. I hope that was useful. And tomorrow we're going to talk about miking, where to put mics. We talked about mics, what they are, but tomorrow we'll talk about actual, like where to put them and how to think about that. And hopefully we'll drag in some of our audio regulars to discuss all of that. Great. Anyway, have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you tomorrow. All right. Take care. I'll start the post show here in just